Hello, everyone. I am the Enforcer. Welcome back, Leaf Spring Army. We are here once again with the Day 43 news of the past 24 hours of the war in Ukraine. Before we start, we have a load of big news tonight, especially as far as this channel is concerned. We actually have gotten Christmas early. The merch shop is now open right now. If you want to get some merch to support the channel, make sure to click the link in the description below to the Enforcer's store, where you can go and check out some of the great merch we have. I made sure that it was the highest quality stuff we could get, and also what's really cool is that the company we're doing this with is called Teespring, and their logo looks like a leaf spring. So I thought that was really neat, kind of an odd coincidence. But make sure to go check it out if you like some merch to support the channel with, and some of the proceeds from that merch will go to support Ukraine. So hope y'all enjoy it. We finally got it out, and the Leaf Spring merch will be coming soon. So I hope y'all enjoy that. And without further ado, let's get to the schedule for tonight's news. First off, we have a little bit of news in Kyiv. Sadly, it's a decent amount of unfortunate stuff. But moving on from that in the location unknown news, we've gotten a pretty decent amount of interesting things to see. Moving on from that, we've gotten a little bit of news in Kharkiv, and we have a decent amount of news in the Southern Front. We also have expanded out today to get some international news, because it appears that there has been a new wave of aid that will be heading in Ukraine's direction, which I'm very happy to see, and so I'm going to make sure to cover that. Due to the Northern Front ceasing to exist, we are actually going to clump together Kyiv and the location unknowns into its own group. We're going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat in between the location unknowns and Kharkiv, and then we're going to cover the news in Kharkiv, everything over here from the Donbass area, including Mariupol and the Azov Sea. Then we're going to cover the remainder of the Eastern Front and the international news in its own group, and then end out the night with a load of more questions. So, with that, we're now going to move on from the news around the Kyiv area, and to start off on a high note, we finally found it. Someone in the stream a while ago, forgot your name specifically, but someone said, I can't wait to see someone paint Wolverines on the side of a tank. It happened. Some Ukrainian is a big fan of the Wolverines movie and painted Wolverines on the side of this BMP. That's really cool. We actually saw Welcome to Kharkiv on a Russian armored command vehicle a while ago, way early on in the war, so we know that we have a Tarkov fan somewhere in Kharkiv, but now we know we also have a Wolverines fan who painted this on a BMP in the western side of Kyiv somewhere. Not specifically sure where, and that's why the marker isn't completely accurate. It's somewhere to the west, but I'm not exactly sure. We're now going to move on to Borodyanka and also this town called... let me zoom in to read it. Oh, well, let me just move that. Mutazhin. There's been some unfortunate news, but I'm glad to see that this man down here, and we'll get to him in a bit, did his service for his village. We're now going to move on to Borodyanka before we cover that bit of news, as we can see that there's been more damage inside of this city, and now Zelensky is claiming that this is the most damaged city in the north of the country. It is more damaged than the Bucha Hostomel airport area. It's almost been completely leveled. They're currently still digging bodies out of the rubble. It's terrible. It's terrible what's happened here. I mean, like, this is literally the worst damage we've seen. This is Mariupol levels or worse. So as you can see here, the damage has been, of course, incredibly extensive. Buildings destroyed all over. It's a terrible thing to see. Also, it appears that the Russians took pot shots at the statue of a famous Ukrainian poet, which doesn't make any sense why they desecrate a memorial to a Ukrainian poet. And on top of that, this guy is he's kind of famous in that Eastern European cultural sphere for his literature. And so I don't know why they shot at him. You know, that doesn't make any sense. That kind of be like the United States at war with Britain, and then we see a William Shakespeare statue and shoot at it. It doesn't make any sense because it's as much a part of our culture as it is theirs. You know, it doesn't make any sense at all. And finally, we can see a picture of it appears Ukrainian army or police officials talking with civilians. So we're now going to move on to the next picture, and this picture is rather sobering, and it's a elderly woman, and she's sitting on a bench, and she's been there for days, about 3 days at this point, and she's been waiting for the Ukrainian firefighters to pull the remains of her dead family out of the rubble of this building. It's a sad picture when you think about the context of it, because this poor woman's been here for a while just waiting to get a last glimpse at her family members who've already passed when this building collapsed. and it's terribly unfortunate, and I hate this. And I hope that the Russians that did this will be held accountable for their crimes. It appears that the United Nations is holding the Russians as a whole accountable for the crimes, but we'll get to that later as well because that's international news. We're now going to move on down to the city of Matizhin, where there has been some interesting news. There was a mayor of this village called Olha Sukenko, who was the mayor. He had the option to leave the city or stay, and he decided that he would stay in the village because he was the mayor and that he was going to help his fellow village people survive the war. Throughout weeks, he provided aid, help, and assistance to all the people of his village as much as he could. And then one day, the Russians decided that this man was too much of an enemy for their own good, and they killed him in the middle of the street. This video is actually the funeral procession in this village of Matizhin for him. And I have to say, when you think of that story, this man died a martyr. There's no other way you can look at that. This man had an option to leave that city, and he refused to, no matter the size. Matizhin is not a big village, even by Ukrainian rule standards. It's not large at all. And so he didn't care. He decided he was going to stay, and he was going to help out those few hundred people that lived in this village because it was his duty as the mayor and as a citizen of the country. And he paid the ultimate price for doing that. But I know that every single person in that village will remember that man's name for the rest of their lives. And so here's the video of the funeral procession. And of course, I believe it's the wife that is directly behind the vehicle that I believe is carrying his body, but she is just wailing, and I can understand why. And I'm guessing the whole entire village has turned out for this because this man was a hero. Anyways, here's the video. It's unfortunate to see that such a wonderful and great person died in this village. It also appears, I'm not really sure about the name, but I was thinking about it, and Olha sounds like the name of a woman. So I'm assuming that that may actually be a woman. Let me pull that up real quick and make sure before I pass a judgment. Olha. Olga. Apparently it's not Olha, it's Olga. But yes, she was a woman, and she died serving her city. Regardless whether she was a man or a woman, she died a Ukrainian patriot, and that's really all that matters in the end, is that she served her people until the very end and didn't care the cost. Before we move on to the next bit of news, I have noticed that slow mode is not on in the chat, and I don't want anyone suffering down there, so everyone give me just a quick moment. I'm going to turn slow chat on, and then I'll be right back. So everyone hang tight, and I'll see y'all in a second. Stand by, everyone. I'm going to be right back. All right, and we're going to be back in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're now back. And no, we don't want to leave the site. Hopefully, y'all can all see. Yes, y'all can see. All right, and so with that, now we've made the slow mode activated, so that's a good thing. Hopefully, no one will be getting melee down there in the comments anymore, because that thing goes a million miles an hour. So we're now going to move on into Kyiv, where we can see a very generous donation of German ambulances finally arriving inside the city today. This is good news, and it's just the beginning of the news today of all the support that has now been pouring in from around the world once more, that the entire Western world has been committed to giving. But as you can see, here's the German ambulances, some Mercedes. You know, Mercedes here in America holds a high amount of esteem, but in Germany, it's just a normal brand, which is just the oddest thing when you really think about it, how import cars kind of work in a culture. We can also see a Volkswagen. Once again, another normal car brand in Germany. And this lets you know for sure that these were German leased, because if the Americans were using Mercedes ambulances, that would be unheard of. Also, it has German on the hood on some of them, so that kind of makes it a little bit more obvious as well. So with that, we're now going to move on outside of Kyiv, because there really wasn't much to comment on that one. And we're now going to move on to the location unknowns. We've had some location unknowns today, not a high amount. It's once again around 11, so it's much like yesterday. So the first thing we can see is that this Russian, if any of y'all have watched CinemaSins, this guy went to the Prometheus school of running away from things as he tries to run away from a Russian drone. So check this out. It's incredibly, I mean, like, obviously he's not trying to run out of this large ditch on the side of the road, because, you know, getting it out of cover may be even worse for him, but still, it's a funny video to watch. Look at this man, he's running like Forrest Gump from this drone. And the best thing about it is that he actually runs this drone right back to the rest of the Russians that are on the side of the road. So if the drone didn't find the Russians beforehand, it found them now, which is something funny. And this guy, he's running. Now the camera's going to pan up because the drone's gotten tired of following him. They're like, oh, what's up here? And you're about to see it's the rest of his Russian friends right there. And they're going to try and shoot down the drone, but it looks like they're not having a lot of success with that. We can also see a couple of more Russians over here trying to get into the Wild West spirit, trying to tan their canvas, it looks like. Oh, man. Using all kinds of... If you notice, another thing... said these aren't issued Russian blankets. I'm assuming that they're maybe blankets. These are multiple different colors. So I'm feeling that they've looted these from houses. Also, we can see another Russian come out from under the ditch right here. And then he tries to take pot shots at the drone. And so then we can see in this next bit of film, this appears to be the side of the road that those Russians were hiding out at. And it appears that the Ukrainians hit an armored vehicle, because we can see one here on the other side of the road. So that Russian, although I believe the drone probably would have found this pretty much like position right here, he may have actually just led the drone straight to their position and given it away if the Ukrainians hadn't already found it. So good job to this guy once again for running like that. Well, actually, let's go back to the start where he ran like Mr. Bean. Look at that. I mean, like, obviously he's scared. I mean, like, you know, you don't know if the drone's armed or not, but it wasn't really smart for him to lead it back to where they were in a way. So, anyways, just a funny video. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see another Stugna attack. Once again, the Stugnas appear to be flexing their legs and muscles a large deal in this war, as they're being used incredibly heavily. As we can see, the missile is on its way towards the tank. The tank is in the crosshairs right now. It's actually right there where the crosshairs go from black on the edges to white. The tank's in there.
Єсть.
And hit.
Оце гарний феєрверк був.
You know, the Ukrainians get so much use out of the Stugnas. I think the Ukrainians, and this is kind of joking, so don't take this as like serious commentary, but the Stugnas are doing so well, I think they're actually going to replace their tank force at the end of this war with nothing but Stugnas. We've seen nothing but, like, all the footage we ever get of ATGM attacks in this war have been Stugnas. At the beginning, it was actually rare. Usually it was Javelins near the first week of the war, but as it's gone on, it's been nothing but Stugnas over and over and over. It's good to know that they can domestically build ATGMs, that they're incredibly reliant on and are very capable, because it lets us know that they have a domestic supply line to make sure that they can provide themselves with Stugna missiles, and they aren't having to count on the graciousness of foreign countries to ensure that their anti-armor abilities aren't impaired. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where you see the DPR once again using more ancient equipment while they're using a PTRD-41. Before I show you all the video, a little bit of context to some of my viewers who may not know what the PTRD is. The PTRD is a World War II anti-tank rifle. The Soviets designed this thing. It's I want to call it a 20 millimeter, but I'm not exactly sure. Let me check this real quick. A 14.5 millimeter. It's a 14.5 millimeter shell that's fired out of this gun. And you can see the thing looks like some kind of a cheap pipe gun that someone would make in their backyard, but nonetheless fires a 14 millimeter shell, 14.2 millimeter shell, and the intended purpose of this weapon when it was made was to punch through German armor. The problem is that by the time Operation Barbarossa happened, this thing could hardly penetrate the side armor of most normal most standard German tanks by 1941, so it was obsolete almost by the time it entered service and it was actually being used anywhere on a battlefield. So with that in mind, you can get a pretty good picture that this thing really doesn't belong in a modern battlefield. It's kind of like putting a Maxim out there. While it may be effective against infantry, it's very large. I believe it is pretty heavy. We can go check Wikipedia because I think Wikipedia's figures on the weapon are pretty accurate. It weighs 38 pounds. How much does a Javelin weigh? Let's pull that up real quick to get a comparison. Javelin weight. The Javelin ATGM. The AT anti-tank weight. Yeah, there we go. That should pull up the figure. This thing weighs 49 pounds. The Javelin weighs 49 pounds. And it can punch through an actual tank. This thing weighs 38 pounds, and it can't do anything but shoot at infantry. So this thing is incredibly heavy. The ergonomics on it are terrible, and it's completely useless. I mean, rather than using it against infantry, what's the point? And then the caliber of it's so small. Why not just call in the BMP-2? It would do a much better job at whatever you're trying to shoot at. It has a 30 millimeter autocannon, so it's just better. I mean, like, obviously they probably don't have a lot of BMPs and the DPR, but still, the case stands. Why use this thing? It's so dated. I mean, like, it's retired in this. It was retired in the Soviet Union in the 60s. I don't know why they'd use this in combat. Nonetheless, here's the actual video showing you that they were using this thing in combat. So here they are, they're shooting in the trench. This is kind of like standard fare if you watched a lot of combat footage from 2014. Now he's reloading the PKP. And it will go to the PTRD in a second. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry. It looks like they're actually doing a, switching out the barrel real quick.
Что-то пытались там отвечать они, да?
Да, сбоку с очередей, да,
I do have to say, as far as the PKP is concerned, much like most modern light machine guns, that's actually a very nice little barrel replacement there. The MG42, now modified into the MG3, is, I believe, one of the first machine guns to implement a very quick and easy barrel replacement, I guess you could say, on a light machine gun. The Browning 50 caliber also has a very easy barrel changing routine. You just literally unscrew the barrel and then screw another one on. So it's very neat to actually see that in practice, because if people don't know, guns actually do wear the barrels down over time, because the bullet travels at such a speed and the rifling is still fragile in a way. After you fire so many rounds, the barrel can wear out, where it's not spinning the bullets at the exact same speed, and it can lead it to be less accurate, or the barrel can overheat, meaning it gets too hot, and it can warp. So in the end, regardless which one happens, you have to replace the barrel at that point or start suffering severe losses in its actual efficiency. And so it's very neat to know that this is something that's kind of coming out of the progression of technologies, that interchangeable parts have never been more interchangeable. Sorry about the rant. That's just kind of like a supply and ergonomics thing that I'm just really into, because I'm always into the supply side of things. It's like, wow, look, it's so cool. They can replace stuff that quick. Anyways, on to the rest of the video where you're going to actually see the PTRD.
Хорошо подожгли, он прям полыхал. Так, а что это вы делаете?
Что это я делаю?
Я не фотогеничен, я не брился. Все, я ушел работать.
So here it is. Here's the PTRD right here. There it is. Okay, he broke his shoulder to fire off one round, and it's probably done nothing, really. So now they gotta struggle with a bolt. Because everything made during World War II was pretty poor quality, and if it was made afterwards, it's still probably poor quality. It's just so pointless. Like, what's really the point of bringing that anywhere? Use an RPG. You know, there's one right there. I feel like that would do a much better job than this thing. Like, it's just it's a glorified sniper rifle that can't even mount optics, and it weighs 38 pounds. It's just pointless. But anyways, I'm gonna let the video continue.
Ну, веселее.
You can see him still firing. What's this guy? The instructor? Oh, here, step down real quick and let me reload your gun for you. What? I mean, like, why does it take? I don't know. I mean, I'm just gonna give up on the commentary here. This is just pointless. Anyways, that's the end of the video. You can get an idea that the DPR is using ancient weapons, along with the Mosin Nagants that we saw a while ago. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see an Azov BMD-4, I believe. No, I'm sorry, not a BMD-4. BTR-4, that's the correct designation, hitting multiple tanks at the same time. Quite an interesting video. It may be the BTR-4 that we saw a long time ago that was driving through the town like it was Battlefield 4 or something, just shooting vehicles on the run. But anyways, here's the footage. Oh, sorry, it's got copyrighted music in it. So as you can see, the two Russian tanks are right here, and it starts slamming both of them, just switching the fire in between both of them. Also, it's missing a little bit, but I'm assuming that maybe because the vehicle was moving a little bit at that time. As you can see, the tanks are moving on. One of them is actually starting to cook off. Now, isn't that crazy? All right, let me show y'all what a BTR-4 looks like, so that way you can get an idea of what killed that tank. This is the BTR-4. Wikipedia article, of course. But that's what this thing looks like. All right, now that doesn't give you a picture of how crazy the Azov is that they would actually square this thing up against two tanks and win. That tells you that those people are pretty brave. That tells you in general that the Ukrainians are incredibly brave, that they're using this kind of vehicle against tanks. It looks like they did it perfectly, though. It looks like the tanks were turned away from them, so there was really no way they could react. But nonetheless, incredibly cool to watch the Azov actually take out something that you would not think normally BTR-4 should be able to take out. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news where we can see the Ukrainians blow up a Russian tank. Once again, this tank was abandoned for some time, but they did blow it up today, I'm guessing because they couldn't recover it. So let's just give it a second, and they'll launch the shot. Boom. Ammo detonation, and the tank is gone. Looks like the farmers won't be having that one, unfortunately, but it's good to know that the Russians won't also get it back either. That is, once again, another tank that they can mark up as a loss. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians run into the Russians in a forest and get in a firefight with them. It appears that these Ukrainian forces were nearly ambushed, but with some quick thinking, it looks like they were able to avoid the ambush just by a hair. I mean, it was incredibly close. They were about to walk straight into an ambush, and they were able to set up positions inside of these charred woods and begin fighting back. So here's the video. As you can see, they're on some kind of path. It may be a one-way road, but it looks more like a path to me. You see they're now moving along. Now they've spotted what appears... Yeah, they spotted the ambush. And now they're getting in position to fight back against the ambush. So now he's gotten behind the berm, and now they're going to set up probably a defensive line on that berm and begin firing back. Very quick thinking on their part. They spotted that just before they were going to get messed up really bad. So that was a very interesting video to watch as far as I'm concerned with that. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we can see destroyed and captured, a destroyed/captured Mista. I'm not exactly sure what the actual situation was with this vehicle, because it says destroyed self-propelled artillery, but in the video, it looks like the Mista is still largely intact and may be able to be recovered in a way. So here's the video.
Кукуруза не убрана. Зато убрали саушку. Каточок роз'їбався, гусляли репла, спустило колесо.
So as you can see, it looks like, for the largest part, also stuffed bear. We'll say they stole that straight out of the store.
Ёбаний він в рот, блядь.
But it looks like, from the most part, from the footage we can see in this video, this tank is largely intact, except for maybe the rear. That's the only spot that we can spot visible damage.
Така от хуйня.
Like, maybe this might be a stretch, because it does look like it was detracked. Maybe the Ukrainians could manage to recover this if they put some time and effort into it. But, you know, that's kind of why I put it as abandoned/destroyed, because I don't really know if, well, capture/destroyed. I don't really know if the Ukrainians are going to try and repurpose this for themselves, or if they're not, because it looks like they may be able to. So that's why I put it down as captured/destroyed. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news. We're nearing the end of it, actually, where we can see a group of Ukrainians huddled around a Starlink dish. The Starlinks are now operational in some areas of Ukraine. Well, they have been for some time, but this is actually the first bit of picture evidence that I've seen of it, which is really cool to know that the Ukrainians are actually connected to the internet now via Starlink. So, of course, not that it matters if I give Elon thanks, but I would like to give Elon thanks for providing such a great internet service in such a time of need for the Ukrainians. Very neat to see. Can't wait to see what other gifts will be given by the West as the war goes on. I'm not really sure for how much longer, but I'm glad to know that even private companies like Elon Musk's companies like SpaceX are stepping forward to give help and support to the Ukrainians as well. So we're now going to move on to the next bits of location unknown news, where we can see the Ukrainians get a puppy and put it into training. It already looks like it's starting to get the guard dog thing down, but here's the video. Isn't that a sweet little puppy? That's a cute one. I hope it actually gets through the war just fine. I'm sure that's going to become their unit's mascot. That's a normal thing most of the times in war, is that military units in a war will sometimes pick up a mascot, or they'll bring one with them, and it kind of sticks with them through the whole war. So I hope that little puppy gets through it okay, and he becomes a wonderful mascot for that unit. He's already cute, so I'm sure he'll have a great career ahead of him. We're now going to move on to the next bit of location unknown news, where we see the Ukrainians capture 2 bucks. If they get any more, they might be able to buy a gallon of gas here in the United States. So anyways, let me click on this link here. It is a news article. But today they managed to capture 2 more buck systems. Great news to know. Once again, bucks, I do believe, cost around $15 million a unit. So they are a much more expensive system than a normal tank, which costs around $3.5 to $4 million for the Russians. So it looks like the Ukrainians have once again struck pay dirt, and maybe It looks like this one may have sustained some damage though, but maybe they could repurpose these and replenish some of their ground air defense forces that may have been damaged during the fighting in the war, since it's gone on for a month and a half at this point. We're now going to move on to the last bit of location unknown news we've got for tonight, which is what this thumbnail was tonight, and I thought it was hilarious. The British Broadcasting Corporation was doing a piece on the ground, and in the background you could see the driver of this Ukrainian BMP-1 wearing a Viking helmet. It's hilarious. Of course, Viking helmets don't have horns on them. I know someone's going to bring that up. They don't. But that's still cool to see this guy wearing one. That's really funny. I think that's actually really cool. And that's really all I can say about it. I got a good laugh out of it. I like that the Ukrainians are having a sense of humor, even though they are in a war. They are winning, so I guess there is something to be joking about, which is the Russians. So, with that, we've covered all the location unknown news. Once again, cool guy. If everyone could give him a little bit of credit, let me know, because I think that's just really cool that you did that. So we're now going to move on from the location unknown news towards Kharkiv. And before we actually get to Kharkiv, we are going to answer 3 to 5 questions from the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
So good evening, everybody. It's good to be with you once again. I just want to quickly mention, I appreciate everyone's support. And I just want to once again tell you about our merch store that we launched today. It is at enforcerstore.com. And I'm really excited about it because we've been working very, very hard behind the scenes on it. I'm very proud of the designs that we put on there. So if everybody wants to check it out, feel free to go check it out. But as always, we appreciate you nonetheless. So moving on to the first comment of the night is actually just a donation from Hoss Boss. He puts in a donation of $50. Thank you very much. That's extremely generous, Hoss, and we appreciate it very much. Next up, we have a comment from the Ghost Doctor, who puts in a donation of $50 and says, "Thank you for all you do and keep up the great work."
And I thank you very much, Hoss Boss and the Ghost Doctor. If that is Doctor, yeah, it is Doctor. I thank y'all so much for the support. It does help out this channel to continue to run, and so it means a lot to me. And so I thank y'all both so much once again. And also, I like the name Hoss Boss. That's pretty cool. And also, not saying that Ghost Doctor is any less cooler. That's a cool name too. But Hoss Boss is some southern stuff. So I thank both of y'all Hosses for supporting this channel. So with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $20 donation from Chris Mack, who says, "I've been with you from almost day one. I have questions and you always answer them. Keep up the great work, Enforcer and mods. You are truly appreciated."
Well, thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy that I try and answer everyone's questions. Unfortunately, if you're a member of the Discord server, you may see that I am on Do Not Disturb like all the time now. And the thing is that I get like 100 DMs a day, and I love getting a lot of DMs, and I try and answer. Actually, I think I answer all of them, but it's just so much that I can't ever sit down and focus on anything because I'll hear that little bloop, from Discord like every minute. So I'm sorry to everyone who may get like a quick answer on Discord, because I'm like in the middle of college or working on the stream, and like the messages are coming through. I'm like, oh my God, there's like 150 of them every day. So sorry about that, but I do thank you for appreciating that I try and get to everyone's questions and answer them somehow. So I thank you once again, man. And I thank you so much for being around since the beginning. I do remember you being in some of the earliest streams in the chat, much like Norcane 26 and the biggest arm in Westland, Oregon. I remember all my early viewers who used to be active in the chat. And so I thank you so much once again for hanging out and being around here and listening to these streams. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And just real quick, as always, if you have a question for the Enforcer, feel free to tag him using @the_Enforcer in the chat, and we will be sure to try to get to that question before we end the stream tonight. So next up, we have a comment from longtime channel supporter Zeta Lane, who puts in $20. She says, "Thank you for bringing us even those who weep. It is important to remember and honor the martyrs of Ukraine."
Well, I thank you very much for the support, and I entirely agree. That's why I make sure to include those kinds of things, because while it's unfortunate, it is beautiful in a kind of way, not really a morbid way or anything, that this woman put the image of, the idea of something greater, her country, before her own safety. And that tells you how much of a patriot and how much of a wonderful person she was, is that she was willing to put her own neck out there to make sure that she took care of her own village and her own people. And so I have to say that was an incredible story, and I hope that she gets a statue built in her honor after this war is over, because that was one hell of a mare, one hell of a woman, and one hell of a Ukrainian. And so I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from Speedbreak, who is a longtime channel supporter. He puts in a donation of $18 and says, any idea of Ukrainian redeployment to the southwest into or around Mariupol or toward the Donbass?
Okay, so I didn't include this in today's stream, but it sounds like, okay, I'm not saying that this is for certain or anything, but it sounded like Zelensky was hinting at the defenders of Mariupol are not going to become martyrs. They're going to save them. I don't know what that entails. I don't know if they know if they're able to reach that city or if they're planning on it, but that kind of sounded like the talk that would suggest that maybe in the planning. So to circle back to that question, could you tell me that one more time if you still have it up real quick, Matthew?
So he said, any idea of Ukrainian redeployment to the southwest into or around Mariupol or toward the Donbass?
Okay, so I answered that one a little bit. And as far as the rest of the front line around Mariupol and, well, the Donbass and such, I'm not exactly sure. Once again, we don't really like to broadcast what the Ukrainians are doing because it may give the Russians an upper hand in a way, just in case if the information I've gotten is something they haven't heard. So I don't really want to go into it much, but one thing I can say for sure is that all the forces that were previously fighting in the northern front have certainly been freed up to move elsewhere. So I'm sure we'll see an escalation in the fighting on both sides down here in the southern front in a while. It looks like the Russians may be preparing something as well. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers your question. And with that, we're going to move to one more question. We'll recognize any donors that have come through, but we're going to go on to one more question, and then we're going to end this question segment and move on to the Kharkiv and Donbass area. So with that, what is the last one we got?
And just real quick before I get to the last one, I just want to recognize an extremely generous donation from Graveborn. He just put in a $300 donation. I can't thank you enough for that. That is extremely generous. And just thank you so much for that. That's very nice.
You've just entered the Hall of Fame with George and New York's premier contractor and patents and trademarks. I mean, I thank you so much. That kind of support helps us to run this channel. And just for everyone to know, because I hope maybe there's someone watching tonight who may be involved in this process, since my name's kind of gotten into other places. We are looking at making an actual video. You heard that right. It's not going to be a stream. It's going to be a video. Matthew and me are really hyped about it. And I thank you very much for the support. And I'll circle back to why I'm talking about this and, the support and everything. Matthew and me are really hyped about this one because it is going to be a banger regardless of how it turns out. It's going to be an incredibly cool video that's really informative and on a very interesting topic. So with that in mind, we have reached out. I'm not going to spoil anything. We've reached out to a company today to see if we can get an interview and a tour of a certain facility that I think everyone will find really interesting, and it's going to be very relevant to what's going on right now. And that kind of support helps us to think into the future and do things like that. And hopefully not really way down the road, maybe even sooner, considering that if support keeps on coming in like that, that will definitely be a thing we can do. We can even get broader ambitions and go out further and do more things. And so I thank you so much for that support, man. I mean, like, that means a lot to me, Graveborn, I gotta say. And so thank you once again. And I just gotta say thank you so much. Also, if y'all would like some merch, just to plug them, I don't mean to plug the merch too much, but it did just open tonight. So if you would like some Enforcer Channel merch, make sure to click the link in the description below. It'll take you to the shop. We got some cool stuff, and so I hope y'all do enjoy it. I tried to make sure it was the highest quality and that the designs were really good, so I hope y'all like them. So with that, we're now going to move on to the last question of the segment, and then we're going to move on to Kharkiv and the Donbass.
And just real quick before I move on to the next question, I just want to say that this video that we're working on is going to be an absolute crazy video. Everybody's going to love it. It's coming out very soon, and we are working very hard behind the scenes. If everybody knew what was going on behind the scenes, y'all be extremely excited. So stick around. It's going to be coming out very soon. We're working very hard on it. And with that being said, we're moving on to the next question, which is from Vilnius Musenix, I believe is how you say it, who puts in a donation of $22 and says, greetings from Latvia. Do you know Russians are celebrating 9th May Day Victory Day. But for Latvia, it's really sad Memorial Day because occupiers changed to even worse. Russians use as an excuse to say that we're bad people too.
Yes, I do know about the Victory Day on May 9th, if that's what you're talking about. I actually usually watch that every single year when it comes out, just to see what they're showcasing. And, you know, if you ever look at the Victory Day parades, and this is something that I think may have led to Russia being viewed as such a strong power. They show the best stuff in the Victory Day parade. They literally pull all the T-14 armadas from around the country, wherever they are, into that parade to show them off. And it gives everyone an impression that the Russian army, the whole entire thing looks like that, because that's what you see in the parade. And if you go into the figures, it's not at all the case. But the Victory Day parade really spreads a lot of mistruths that, if you look below the surface, just don't really exist. And that's one of them. And also, you know, what you're talking about in Estonia is also the same. And it's kind of like the same in Ukraine as well, like the Holodomor, you know, because the Russians like to make it look like they have very good relations with the Ukrainians. But under Stalin, he induced a famine that killed hundreds of thousands, I believe even millions of Ukrainians over the course of a couple of years. So keep that in mind when you think about Russian-Ukrainian relations next. And I thank you so much for the support. It means a lot to me, and I'm glad that you did mention that, because the Baltic states are something that's kind of overlooked. Usually everyone looks at kind of like the larger Warsaw Pact states and the former members of the Soviet Union, such as Belarus, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and so on. But the Baltic states are usually just completely forgotten. So I'm glad that you brought that up. And with that, we've reached the end of this question segment. We will, of course, get around to everyone's super chats and answer all of them by the end of the stream. But for now, we're going to move back on to the news in Kharkiv and the Donbass, which will include Mariupol and the Azov Sea. Starting off in Kharkiv, well, you've actually seen a little bit of behind the scenes footage from Russia as they prepare to fire grads near the Kharkiv area. Check out the process they go through to aim the grads towards the city. It's actually a pretty lengthy process. I believe, as far as I was able to grasp earlier, this is the process that you use if you do not have GPS location to help you aim the pieces. So check it out.
Батарея, внимание! Цель 503.
So you can see here they're in the command vehicle, I'm assuming, transmitting the information to the grads. Now we see the grads firing. One thing I'd like y'all to notice, check this, something falls off of the grad. Nothing's supposed to fall off of the grad when it's firing, but something does here in a second. If someone could identify what that is, maybe it is supposed to fall off, but it's kind of weird that it doesn't fall off with the first rocket or any other rockets. It just falls off with this one. So check it out. Right there. Wait a minute, hang on. I think that was a can. Yeah, that was a can of something. Sorry, y'all. For some reason, when I watched the video earlier, it was like a mind trick, and I was like, oh, something fell off. I was like, that's a perfect thing to mention, but nah, it's just like a ration box or something like that. And so that's the end of that video. You kind of saw a little bit of the process of how they aim the grads and then seeing them fire. It's a little bit of an interesting behind-the-scenes look at how they operate, and I do find that very interesting. So actually, with that, that's actually all the news we've gotten in the Kharkiv area. There has been no news once again, which suggests to me that the Ukrainians must be making great progress or holding the Russians incredibly well in the Kharkiv area, considering we haven't even gotten news of damage anymore inside of the city. So with that, we're now going to move on towards the Donbass, where a lot of people are thinking that this may become the next flashpoint in this war for some large battles and large movements on both sides. And I kind of have to agree at this point that that may be the case. It does appear that the Russians won't be backing out of this war immediately, and so considering that they're maybe having a shift in plans, this does look like it will be the next thing they do. The problem, that being said, is that Severodonetsk looks like it's going to become the next Kyiv. It looks like the Ukrainians have a very good hold of this city, and that it's not going to fall, and we know that the Russians don't have any offensive capabilities to actually push hardened defenders out of a city. The only one we've seen them actually succeed in is Kherson. Melitopol, I kind of consider a smaller city, and I believe if we pull up the population figure, it kind of is. It's around 100,000 people. But let me check. 154,000. Kherson was 289,000, much larger, and Bryansk is just a little bit smaller, but I kind of consider it in the same ballpark and size in a way. So the only major city they've been able to take is Kherson. And we see the Ukrainians are actually having a hard time uprooting the Russians as well from their positions, which may suggest, considering that both sides are having a hard time committing to offensive action in urban areas, and we don't see a lot of progress as far as that, but we can always see the defender kind of succeeding in holding the city. We may get the idea that this is actually kind of like these are evenly matched forces at the end of the day, because they're both having the same strengths in open ground. Well, actually, the Russians have a weakness in open ground and really everywhere. So I'm going to have to revisit that statement and say that it can't be a stalemate, or otherwise the entire northern and eastern front, half of it, wouldn't have collapsed. So actually, I was going to go down a path of giving the Russians a little bit of credit, but once I actually started thinking about it, nah, they don't deserve any credit. So we're now going to move on to the first bit of news we've gotten today, where we can see an Orlan 10 drone that the Russians use destroyed. It's mostly intact. Kind of looks like an RC plane that broke up. It really kind of is. But here you can see it shattered into little pieces. Not really shattering into little pieces. It actually looks like it was kind of like in kit form, like they were going to put it together. But nonetheless, it appears that it was destroyed in some kind of way, and it won't be any longer used by the Russians, which is good news. We're now going to move on past the Severodonetsk area, because unfortunately we haven't had a lot of news from there today, and we're now going to move near this town of Popasna, where we have seen more evidence of the Russians committing war crimes. They are dropping white phosphorus on film in this video. Take a look at this. This is the evidence you need. No longer are there pictures. This is actual video of white phosphorus being used, and it's not exploding on the ground. It's air bursting, and then the white phosphorus floats down to the ground. As you see, the white phosphorus is falling towards the ground. And that stuff is just raining death. That stuff never stops burning, pretty much. And so if it falls on someone, it's going to burn clean through them. And there's really no way to stop it. The United States actually used white phosphorus and napalm in Vietnam, because they found out that the Vietnamese, when napalm landed on them, if they were on fire, considering that a decent amount of these places were in rice paddies or near a creek or something, or a stream, or maybe in the Mekong Delta, they would just jump in the water and the napalm would extinguish itself because it was suffocated of oxygen in the water. You know, it stops burning. So they decided that to make napalm more effective, they had Dow Chemicals mix white phosphorus into the napalm solution, so that way, regardless if they jumped in the water, the white phosphorus would just keep on burning, and it would kill them. And so, you know, after that, white phosphorus has now become a war crime in recent years. Now they say that you cannot use white phosphorus on civilians. Of course, you can't use any weapons on civilians at all in war, according to the rules of war. But you also can't use it on combatants to burn them. If you can only use white phosphorus explosives if you can prove that all of the combatants that were killed by that white phosphorus were killed in the explosion and not from the burning. So pretty much it rules it out, because there's no way to really kill people with white phosphorus and then stop other people nearby from burning from it. So it kind of rules it out completely, because it's really impractical to do one thing without the other. They're kind of mutually combined with each other. So once again, Russian war crimes on film this time. You can see them clearly right here in the middle of combat. So we're now going to move on from the area of Popasna, and we're now going to move further on down the border towards Marinka, which is right outside the city of Donetsk, where we can see the DPR attack Ukrainian trenches somewhere near the village of Marinka. So take a look at this. Looks like something kind of out of World War I with how the trenches are dug. Of course, you know, trenches are synonymously associated with World War I, but they've been used throughout a large deal of history during sieges in the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, all the way through the Civil War. Like the Siege of Petersburg had a large amount of trench works built. And also, if you don't know about the Battle of the Crater, check that out. Now, that was incredibly interesting. It was kind of like early mine warfare that you would see in World War I years later. But anyways, here's the video. So as you can see, the drone is just kind of taking a look I mean, like, this is so eerily familiar, in a way. And it's weird how battlefields start to repeat themselves and how this looks so much like World War One. You have the completely destroyed buildings, almost down to the foundations around this trench. The trench doesn't follow a straight line; it's zigzagging a bit, so that way, if artillery falls directly into it, it doesn't travel down down the lengths of the trench. It'll be broken up by the breaks in the straight path. And the little pot marks and craters that are all around this trench. If I pulled up a color picture, and I will, of World War One, it looks identical. Color aerial picture of World War One. I know I spelled aerial wrong, sorry. But anyways, here is a pretty decent picture. Let me find one that looks good enough. Let's see. There's a picture of World War One just from the damage in the town. It looks a lot like Mariupol. You know, and it's weird. You know, war looks the same regardless the age. You know, the vehicles change, the weapons change, the people and the cultures can change, but the damage looks the same in a way. But let me get to this picture up here. I think this will be our best bet. Let's just wait a second for the graphics to load, hopefully. And here we are. You can see the bombed out village. Most of the buildings have been destroyed to the foundation. Sadly, I don't think... Yeah, we can actually see a bit of trench work right here, I believe. But you can see that this village has been bombed out. Craters everywhere. Smoke rising up from the, you know, recent fresh-made craters. And then in this footage here, tell me there is a difference in between these two pictures. This is pretty much World War I in a way, occurring in this one film. 100 years later. Oh, a little over 100 years later. And it's just so odd how war can advance so much in our minds, but when you really look at it, it's actually quite similar. It's just very eerie in a way. But anyways, I'm going to let y'all get back to the video. As you can see, the first shell landed right near the trench. The second one lands in front of the trench, just slightly missing it. And now there's a second of silence. I guess the artillerists may be correcting the shots. This is once again a Russian drone, so I'm assuming that this is a spotter and it's telling them how to adjust the fire. I don't see any Ukrainian troops in this trench, except for maybe up here. Yeah, we can see some right here. They're now moving. And we can actually see a few down here as well. And we can see some Ukrainian troops moving up here. We can also see some further up the trench works, more towards the top of the screen. As you see, they're trying to quickly hurry along, you know, because they're probably scared shitless now. Sorry for the language there, but they're probably scared pretty terribly now that the fire's landing around them. That would shake anyone up. And now they're trying to move, I'm assuming, to a safer location, probably near a dugout, if they have one. Although this trench doesn't look like it has dugouts often. Of course, one always has to note that trenches are the superior defensive system to ensure that troops don't get leveled by artillery. The whole point trenches were dug in such large numbers in World War I is that it breaks the line of sight in between a forward-firing artillery piece like a 75mm MLE, you know, from the enemy. And, you know, I don't know the German counterpart for that. I just know that they started to dig the trenches in World War I to protect themselves from direct artillery fire that fires straight at them, you know, something they can visibly see. And then later on in the war, while everyone started to use indirect artillery fire where they kind of just lob the shells forward and into the battlefield from miles away, still the effect was the same. Infantry were largely protected from artillery shells and blasts because trenches are just such a good system. They're incredibly narrow, so you have to hit them right on the money, right inside of the trench to actually do anything. And then on top of that, when you have breaks in the trench, the damage is largely contained into a very small area. So trenches are just an incredibly good defensive system. I don't really have to tell anyone that. I'm sure y'all know. And that's why trenches made a stalemate occur in World War I, because the defensive networks were so good on both sides that you just really couldn't push through it incredibly well. Anyways, on to the rest of the video. We can now see that the Ukrainians have appeared to generally stop and hold in place. It looks like they're now hunkered down and they're waiting for the shelling to stop. As the video zooms out, okay, now that literally is the picture that I just showed y'all just a while ago. That's crazy. I don't know what this is. It looks like a hill, but you know, then again, it may be a slag heap or something that has just kind of grown over with dirt. Maybe kind of like a former industrial area, which is interesting. I wonder which. It looks like the Ukrainian trenches are supposed to be facing towards the left side of the screen. Probably not towards the right, which is interesting to me because you would think they would try and build the trenches on the hill instead of down here under the hill, because then troops could kind of fire a little bit better downwards into the trench if they were able to capture that hill. We can see a shell hit a building up here on the top part of the screen. Also, let's say there's another explosion that happened right down here, almost right on the trench. Once again, the Ukrainian troops are scrambling to move away from that specific spot. Now we see another shell land somewhere near the top right of the screen. We can see more Ukrainian troops trying to move further down the trench once more. I'm not really sure, considering that this is the second group of soldiers that we've seen moving downwards in the trench. I'm not really sure if they're using it as a form of transport for the troops where they're protected from fire, because it appears that they're trying to move them down the trench work while under fire, which may suggest that they're actually trying to get somewhere. Now, that looked like a direct hit on the trench. Let's go back and take a look at that one more time. So it looks like the trench takes a little zigzag through here. It takes a sharp right, then a sharp left. It kind of does this little V shape, and then it takes another sharp left, and then a slight right, and the trench straightens out. And that shell hit. Okay, it hit just in front of it by like a few feet. So if anyone was in that part of the trench, hopefully they didn't get wounded, because that was incredibly close, and I'm sure that if anyone was around, that would have been a wounding hit for someone. So we can now see the Ukrainian troops are still huddled in this one spot in the trench. I don't really know about the first group. We can see another shell land, getting a little bit closer to them. I don't know if the artillery is trying to lash out at the particular groups of soldiers, or if they're just trying to hit the trench at large, as it does look like the artillery fire is being adjusted to get closer to the groups. We can now see what may be the first group of troops that are further down the line near this broken up house, and they're sitting inside the trench. Now the fire is landing a little bit south of them. This guy's gotten up and shifted. He's trying to move a little bit further away from that. Yeah, they don't have dugouts on this trench, or they probably would have gotten in them. So it's just a basic trench. Still effective, but, you know, dugouts are, of course, nice. Now we can see the group may have moved a little bit further down and is kind of joined up with the first group. We can now see shells landing once more, almost in the same spot. So I think they are going for the trench at large and not the soldiers in particular. We won't know if this artillery barrage was backed up by some kind of attack from the Russians. Unfortunately, the video doesn't go on that long. We just see the Ukrainians getting barraged and moving around inside the trench. So I wonder if this was kind of like a World War I-esque thing, where they committed an artillery barrage on the trench and then began a push towards it and tried to uproot the defenders. We can now see that they've moved a little bit further down the trench. They've moved from the abandoned, torn-down houses to this next set of abandoned, torn-down houses in the trench work. We can see one guy who appeared to flag something, and then the rounds started hitting all around them right then. Which, and now that I'm thinking about that, now that I thought about that, they may be attacking the troops at large. It's just that the artillery fire is a little bit off each time, and they keep on trying to adjust. And so that's the end of the video. We don't know the fate of the Ukrainians. We don't know if a shell landed directly in that trench. We don't know anything like that. We just know that luckily they weren't getting hit in the video. hopefully, if there was an attack after this barrage, they were able to push that off as well. And so, with that, that is the end of that video, and that is actually all the news we've gotten from the Donbass today. Also, one thing I'd like to say, I used to do this a lot in the streams, so hopefully everyone will bear with me for a second. While I lay out a little colored block on this map that says what I think the Russians will do next, you can see that a pocket here is forming in between Izium and Orlivka, and the road M03 runs straight from one side of that pocket to the other. I think the Russians, considering that wars, and especially the Russian strategy of fighting wars, revolves around main roads, I believe they're going to try and push from both sides of the M03 and try and connect the troops in the middle near Slovyansk, so that way they can encircle a large pocket of Ukrainian troops in this area. So I'm actually going to mark this up as a little shape, you know, kind of like a field. We're going to call this Russian advance prop for probably. We'll save that. We'll mark this up in the red color. Red is a very clear color. I actually did have a suggestion. I thought it was pretty good, and I'm still thinking about it, and I'd like to see what everyone thinks in the chat, of changing the color of the front lines down here to blue or yellow or something, so that way they're Ukrainian colors. But nonetheless, let me know what y'all think in the chat. I think the Russians will try and do this. It seems like one of the easiest things to do, and it may encircle a large portion of forces that are currently fighting in Severodonetsk, which may create another situation like Mariupol. Although that situation isn't going well for them, it's going better than it would have if Mariupol was still connected to the front lines and getting supplies regularly in some form. So, with that, actually we're going to make that a different color because that makes it look like it's actually a frontline thing. We will make that yellow. And so hopefully that kind of clears up what it is and what it's for. So we're now going to move on from this area of the Donbass. We're now going to move down to the last bits of news, and we've gotten very little of it out of Mariupol today. First, we can see Russian artillery hitting the Azovstal metallurgical plant inside of Mariupol. Here's the footage of that, of course, with a nasty RT watermark on it. But you can see the shells are landing near the outside perimeter, which suggests that the Azov is still holding on to the outside perimeter of the plant. Otherwise, the Russians wouldn't be committing an artillery barrage in this specific area. As you see, shells are hitting a little bit farther back as well. And we're not sure as to the success of the strike. We don't know if there were any troops killed. We just know that in the video there was an artillery strike on the perimeter, which gives us a good idea that the Azov is still holding the perimeter of the Azovstal, because there's been a lot of pro-Russian maps showing the situation in Mariupol, and a lot of them say that the Azovstal has actually been completely captured at this point, but we can tell by this video that that can't be the case, or otherwise they wouldn't be bombarding the perimeter of the metallurgical plant, because the Azov wouldn't be there for them to do that. So that kind of gives us a little bit of a better image of what's going on down there. And so I will adjust this map a little bit right here on stream, because we do know that the Russians have moved forward from this initial front line that was drawn up weeks ago, and they are on the edge of the Azovstal now, probably around here. We'll also move this down as well, because we know that the Azov and the other units that are currently in Mariupol have lost a little bit of land. So we can say that the front line has changed on the eastern side of the city definitively towards something more like that, but we don't really know about the eastern side, or the western side, all too well. And so we're still going to wait for some information to come out, and I'm going to try and make it my objective to actually carve out an accurate depiction of the front lines of Mariupol as best as possible. So we're now going to move on to the next bit of news inside Mariupol, where we can see more proof and evidence of the damage in the center of Mariupol. In this picture, you can see that all the buildings on this street have either been destroyed by artillery blasts or by the ensuing fires afterwards. And that's a terrible sight. This city will probably take a decent while to recover from this sort of thing. Probably not too long. It'll be maybe a few years, maybe 2 or 3 years at worst, maybe a year at best. But I hate to see this kind of damage, because this city has a decent amount of historical buildings in it. Of course, like the theater that was destroyed a while ago. And I hate to see that such wonderful historical buildings are at jeopardy. Of course, I'm a historian. I'm a major in history. And so I don't like to see historical buildings being damaged or destroyed, because it's a loss of our of like worldwide culture in a way, and things that people will never be able to revisit, at least in its original form. I absolutely hate that, but nonetheless, it is what it is at this point. And I do hope that even though this is bad news, the defenders of Mariupol will hold this city until the end of this war. I wonder if that's a possibility. You know, that's nothing more than a hope. There's really nothing to back that up. As far as we know, they're holding on to a very small part of the city now, and it may fall within days or weeks. But once again, they manage to surprise us every day that they continue to hold. And so I'm not going to put an actual timeline on when I think the city will fall. So we're going to move on to the news out in the Azov Sea, where we saw footage today of a Russian ship firing some kind of rockets or munitions towards the city of Mariupol. So I'm going to let y'all see that footage. It's very clear and distinct because of the afternoon sky. But here's the video. So you can see the fires coming from a ship out at sea. I'm not exactly sure what kind of fire that is, and I don't really know what kind of Russian ship would be doing that, because I don't know of a lot of them that just carry unguided rocket batteries. I don't know if that's a specifically made ship that has that sort of weapon on it. But if I could get an answer in the comments, I'm sure there is a naval expert here in the chat. We've got a lot of people watching right now. And so hopefully someone can say what that ship is, and hopefully I can hear about it in the next round of questions.
А там Мариуполь. И сейчас только звук дойдет.
And now you can hear the report of the missile fire in the distance. And so that is the end of that. Of course, it is a boat, but I would like to know if anyone has an idea of the specific kind of ship that would carry that kind of weaponry. I'm sure that a lot of Russian ships... Well, actually, let's take a look. Let's take a little endeavor into that. Russian surface fleet. Let's take a look. I know no submarine is going to be carrying a weapon like that. That's something I can say with certainty. And once again, I want everyone to know, I'm not an expert on all kinds of military technology. I just look at the overall picture for the most part, and I do like to keep brushed up on military technology, but it isn't something that I like harp over. I think it's more important to focus on strategies and logistics more so than the specific weapon and its like very specific set of capabilities. So let's see the surface fleet. I saw all the ships up there. It's not going to be that one for sure. It's not going... Hey, wait a minute. Is that the Orsk? Wait a minute, hang on. Let's see. Passage of warships to Kronstadt. Ah, man, you know... Neat little fort, by the way. That's a really cool entrance. But is that the Orsk? I'd love to know, because that looks a lot... It's kind of similar to the same kind of ship the Orsk was. Anyways, we're going to move on. Alright, we're going to go back up to the top. That's where they had the list of ships. To cut it short, I just don't see a ship that can do that. It looks like most of them are kind of like one-gun ships, you know, with one large gun, maybe like 127 millimeter or something like that. And then the rest of the guns on the ship are some kind of little anti-air defense systems, you know, kind of like the, forgot what that thing is called, but you know, it's the one on the ship that goes incoming, 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 and then it like shoots a Gatling gun. I forgot the specific name of it. I know what it's called. It's on the tip of my tongue, but unfortunately I can't think of it. So we're now going to move on from that. You get the idea. There was a ship at sea firing some kind of unguided rockets, most likely towards the city of Mariupol. We're now going to move on to the Kherson and Sevastopol area. But before we do, I'm going to take 3 to 5 questions from the chat. I was thinking, is that the way I laid out the schedule? And it is. So I'm going to take 3 to 5 more questions from the chat, and then we're going to move on to the Kherson and Black Sea news, and then we're going to move on to the international news as a whole, which is pretty interesting. So I suggest y'all stay around if you don't like the question segment, because the news afterwards is actually very interesting. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
So just to give a heads up, it looks like we currently have about 20 to 30, well, excuse me, 25 to 30 super chats at the moment. So the first one up is from Zeta Lane, who puts in a very generous donation of $100. She says, inspired by Graveborn, here's a contribution toward your new video and all future ventures. Good luck and Slava Ukraine.
Oh, thank you very much, Elaine, for your donation. You've been a return supporter, and I'm more than happy for all the support you've given me so far. And I'm glad that you're willing to give me more support. And I am going to try, Matthew and me are going to try as best we can to make sure that this first video we do is going to be one of the best videos y'all have seen. We're going to make sure it's packed with information, very interesting to watch, and fortunately, it's local. We actually have here in Alabama, the second largest nuclear power plant in the country in terms of power production. So I can't wait to. Well, actually, that just gave away what it's about a bit, but well, dang, I just destroyed this. I just spoiled it. I'm sorry, y'all. But anyways, yeah, I can't wait to make it. Thank you very much for the support, and with that, we're gonna move on to the next question. But I thank you once again, Cedar Lane. It means a lot to me.
And next up, we have a question from Brian Waitikas, who puts in a donation of $100 as well. He says, I would like to call out to the U.S. to send Ukraine AH-64s, M1 Abrams, and A-10 Warthogs. Even a small percentage of this aging stock might help Ukraine to win, rather than just not losing. Let's do more, as we were requested to do.
I agree. It would be nice to do more. I don't know if it would be easy to train Ukrainian tankers on new systems like the Abrams. But once again, it couldn't do any more harm than good. So hopefully something like that could happen in the future. I don't know about A-10s though. Once again, someone came up with the idea yesterday. It was actually a simple yet genius idea of just actually attaching the planes to tractors and just driving them across the border. That would kind of get around the whole thing of flying aircraft in that Russia's always saying will lead to war. So, you'd be like, well, we're not really flying them in, we're rolling them in. So I thank you very much for the support. Hopefully, we can actually provide more support than what we already have. But we do have news today that things may be changing and we may be providing historical levels of support here soon. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does address the comment and the question in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to two more questions, and then we're going to move on to the Kherson and Sevastopol news and the international news as well.
And real quick, I just want to recognize a couple of donations here. We have an $18 donation from David Williams and a $12 donation from Ferdy R. Thank you both for your support of the channel. As always, it is greatly, greatly appreciated. So next up, we have a comment from Alan Franson, who puts in a donation of $20, and he says, keep up the good work.
And thank you very much for enjoying the work we do. We are going to make sure that the streams do continue until the end of the war. So I thank you very much for the support, and we are going to try and tack on some videos to it as well. So hopefully everyone will have a smorgasbord of very interesting content to watch when we're not talking about the war, in the middle of the day, and even once the war is finally over, and hopefully that'll be soon. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I thank you very much for enjoying it. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question, and then we're going to move on to the Kherson, Black Sea, and international news.
And our last question of the segment goes to Level 70, who puts in a donation of $11. He says, how are the Ukrainians refilling their vehicles when Russia keeps blowing up their oil refineries?
They keep refueling the vehicles, I'm assuming, because the Russians aren't actually effectively attacking all of their fuel and oil reserves. I can't really explain where they are. Obviously I wouldn't want to, because that might give the Russians ideas. But I don't really know where the oil is coming from. But we've never heard of oil shortages, and we've never heard the Ukrainians desperately ask other countries for oil. I believe we did a little bit at the start, but it wasn't like a desperate plea. It was just kind of like, hey, could we have a little? And then we didn't hear anything afterwards. So I'm guessing that they have some sort of like waterproof, seal-tight oil supply line where they're able to supply their vehicles constantly with what they need, because it's crazy the level of oil they have, because we see so much of it destroyed, but we never see them complaining about running out of it anywhere. And so that's really interesting. And also, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question in a way. Unfortunately, I really can't get into it because I don't even know how they're doing it. It's kind of like a miracle in a way. But once again, I thank you for the support. And with that, we're now going to move on to the Kherson, Black Sea, and international news. So starting off in Kherson, we have heard news, and this may be able to be confirmed, and that's why it was included on tonight's news, that the situation in Kherson is worsening. Without going straight to the news article, well, actually, I'll just go to it so that way I can back this up with a little bit of text. The situation in Kherson appears to be grave, according to the Euromaidan press. According to what the information they have found, Kherson has enough flour for 1 week. They also haven't allowed humanitarian convoys since 3 days ago, and they've also stopped allowing people to leave. So it sounds like there may be a large humanitarian situation that will begin to evolve inside of Kherson very soon. Hopefully the Ukrainians can liberate the city before this gets too bad, and hopefully before the Russians begin to execute civilians like they did in the Bucha, Hostomel, Irpin, Borodyanka, and northern Kyiv area as a whole. So we're going to keep an eye on that information and see if we can get anything that shows that the situation is developing into a worser light or a better light. But we'll just have to be patient, of course, and see how it goes. We're now going to move on into the Black Sea, where today we've seen another video of a ship launching Caliber missiles. The date is unknown. I'm not exactly sure when this occurred, but the video did come out today as far as I was concerned, so that's why it's included in today's news. So here's the video, and I'll rewind it to the start so that way y'all can see it. And so that's the end of the video. Of course, there's just Caliber missiles being fired from a ship. Of course, the Russians can't, apparently, according to our information, provide humanitarian aid, but they can provide an ample supply of cruise missiles that they're probably running out of the parts to manufacture to the Ukrainians, which is just stupid and sickening in a way that they're able to just keep on pushing this war, but everything's falling apart, including their own army in the meantime, due to mismanagement and corruption. We're now going to move on to Switzerland. I put this news in Switzerland, although it may have happened in New York. I'm not exactly sure which UN headquarters this vote occurred at, although the last bits of UN meetings and such that we saw occurred in Geneva. But the big news today is that the UN has suspended Russia from the Human Rights Council. It was almost an overwhelming majority of countries, you know, at least that did vote and didn't abstain from voting, that said that Russia should be removed from the UN Human Rights Council. This was on the basis that Russia committing war crimes isn't exactly a good look for one of the main nations sitting in the Human Rights Council, and so they decided to remove them. The article attached there pretty much explains that. Also, I have heard that the link to the map in the description is actually to day 42, which is odd because it's actually this one. I click share and put it on there, so I don't know why it's the day 42 one. Maybe the title is maybe it shows everything on the last week. I'm not really sure. I'll look into that after the stream, though. Finally, to show y'all how the votes broke down in the UN Council today, here's the voting results map, which shows all the countries who voted to expel Russia from the Human Rights Council, all the countries who didn't want to expel them from the Human Rights Council, and all the countries that abstained from voting. So as you can see, of course, the entirety of the European Union all voted in one way, including the neutral countries such as Switzerland, Finland, Sweden, and Norway. It's very interesting to me that Switzerland did not abstain from this vote, considering that they have a long-time history of neutrality, and now they appear to have broken that neutrality in light of recent events, and they are now picking a side, and it's our side, which is good to know. Also, we can see that China said they shouldn't be removed from the Human Rights Council. North Korea also voted that as well, along with Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and oh man, that was going to give me a problem. I forgot the name of that country right there. I'm sorry, everyone forgive me. I will commit seppuku after the stream for that, but I forgot the name of that one country there. I know that one's Turkmenistan, but for the life of everything, I forgot what this one's called. It's a stan. It's one of the stan countries, but can't think of it. Iran and Syria also voted that they should stay on the Human Rights Council. Algeria, and I believe that's Mali, voted for them to stay. Ethiopia and Eritrea also voted for them to stay on. That kind of tells us that we need to start putting some pressure on Some of these countries are not really focusing on. Also, there's some that are, of course, of the usual suspects. Zimbabwe, interestingly enough, voted for Russia to stay on the Human Rights Council. Now, that one's kind of an odd one to me, because they don't even have an economy to stand on in the first place, so I don't even know how you'd sanction them. Of course, we have the, I believe, Democratic Republic of the Congo here. Or this one, I don't know these countries right here. I'm just going to say that I don't really focus too much on, well, I didn't focus too much on South America until I got a South American friend from Brazil, and then I started to focus on South American geography a little bit. But then, moving on from that, we appear to have, oh my god, I just said I focused on it. I forgot the name of this country. It's stumping me right now. Sorry about that, y'all. We're going to move on to Cuba, and also we can see, I believe that's Nicaragua, have also voted that Russia should stay on the Human Rights Council. Then there was a whole bunch of countries. Now, this was the interesting one, that abstained from voting. That, of course, is something also interesting to me as well. Mexico abstained from voting. Now, that, I don't know what the specifics behind why they didn't vote, but that's interesting to me. And considering that they abstained from voting, that says a lot about their actual position, at least on the national level right now. And the United States may want to keep a close eye on what's happening with the Mexican government, because if it starts to go into a bad direction, considering it's bordering the United States, and we generally have kind of this thing in America historically where we control the entirety of the Americas when things start going south, we might want to actually step in and do something if the government starts to go in a bad direction down there. Brazil also abstained from voting. I'm not particularly sure the complex reasons why they didn't, but that's interesting nonetheless. We can also see Saudi Arabia and Iraq also abstained from voting, which tells us a lot about their positions governmentally. And so, but also, by the way, I think that's Bolivia. I just looked at the chat for a quick second. It's Bolivia. I'm sorry about that, y'all. I do know the countries around it. That's Paraguay. That's Argentina. That's Chile. I know them, but I don't know that one for some reason. I'm sorry about that. Anyways, we're going to move on. Wait. Oh, God. I think that may be Uruguay. I'm screwing everything up. Sorry about that. We're going to move on. India and Pakistan. Now, these were expected. They abstained from voting. The reason why they're abstaining from voting is because while they're not wanting to get screwed over by the West, which is why they didn't vote for them to stay on it, they're also not wanting to screw up their relations with the Russians, and so they abstain from voting. The Indians and the Pakistanis have been taking a largely neutral stance against the Russians, and have actually been taking somewhat of a favorable stance with them, because they're trying to get those cheap resources that the West is no longer buying, and the Russians are pretty much selling in bulk to get rid of. So, with that, that's kind of like the breakdown of the map. Of course, there are some African countries that abstain from voting, like Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Tanzania, South Africa, Mozambique, and so on. But really, most African countries beyond Egypt, South Africa, and Nigeria are economically insignificant, and so they're kind of cut out. That's why we focus on the Chinese, the Japanese, the Russians, Europe, North America, Australia, and so on, because they actually have that heavy-hitting power, unlike the South American and African countries, as well as kind of like the Middle Eastern countries. While the Saudi Arabians are a powerhouse right now, once they run out of oil, it's assumed that they will actually fall off in power, and the current regime in charge over there will actually have a lot of problems defending itself from, outside powers and also internal powers. So we'll see how that develops in, the years to come. Of course, the streams probably won't be running by then, but we'll see how that goes. And so we're now going to move out of this voting map, and we're going to move on outside of Switzerland to Belgium, where we've heard the European Union pledge more support for Ukraine. They have proposed an additional 500 million euros to be given in military aid to Ukraine, on top of the $1 billion in military aid they have already pledged. So that's very interesting in a way. That's of course giving half of what they originally gave on top of what they've already given, which is a decent amount of support. I don't know what that specifically is going to entail as far as the equipment, because it sounded like they weren't giving that in raw cash. Of course, they were giving it in terms of the monetary value of supplies. So I wonder what they'll be giving them next. It'll be interesting to see, and we'll be waiting in the coming days to see what it may actually be, whether they be tanks, anti-ship systems. I'm not really sure. There's a load of things that I could say and list off, but y'all get the picture. We're now going to move on overseas, where I wanted to show an interesting event in America because there seems to be a bit of a deal where people are starting to think that Russia is the good guys in the United States. I'm pro-Ukrainian, so y'all already know my stance on that. But nonetheless, we can see brother wars starting to occur in the neighborhoods as people are raising Russian flags and others are raising Ukrainian flags in response. So take a look at this. Oh yeah, this has got copyrighted music. So there's a Russian flag on this person's house, and as the TikTok explains, the neighbors started to put up Ukrainian flags. So it's interesting. We're starting to see a small little social wars happening in the United States in between pro-Russians and pro-Ukrainians. Of course, I live in the United States, probably like most of my viewers. So y'all are probably starting to watch the political nuances of the whole thing unfold. Y'all know I don't get into American politics on here because that will turn into a nightmare very quickly. So we're now going to move on to the area around Washington, D.C. as we start to see a recent amount of huge developments in terms of the United States support. And first up, we can actually see a up-to-date list of the military aid they provided. I actually saw this list on my server. Good job to the person who posted it. Glad you found it. But anyways, we have given them 1,400 Stinger anti-aircraft systems, 1,400 Stinger manpads, 5,000 Javelin anti-armor systems. I guess that includes the CLUs. 7,000 other anti-armor systems. So I bet those are including the AT-4, things like that. They've had hundreds of switchblades. I love how they don't give the exact number; they just say hundreds. But a decent amount of these still have, numbers attached to them. 7,000 small arms. That's not an incredibly high number, really. 7,000 is something of a small number when talking about small arms. 50 million rounds of ammunition. Once again, it's a good help, but in terms of actual ammo, that's still, once again, kind of a smaller number. But 45,000 sets of body armor and helmets, that's a huge number. That probably is able to equip a large amount of the TDFs that were mobilized in the initial call of mobilization a few days into the war. Of course, laser-guided systems, Puma unmanned aerial systems, 4 counter-artillery and counter-unmanned aerial system tracking radars, which is very interesting. We haven't heard anything about that. 4 counter-mortar radar systems, which is incredibly interesting. Armored high-mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles. I'm assuming that those may be strikers. I'm not exactly sure. Night vision devices, thermal imagery, and optics. They didn't give us a number on that, and I think it would be important to actually assess the number on MVDs that have been issued. Tactical secure communication systems. Very nice. Now, that's something that's really important. Much like logistics is important, communications can also make or break a war. When the Germans invaded France, the French did not have a large amount of radio systems. The Germans, however, had radio systems inside of every tank. The Russians also ran into this problem as well fighting the Germans, is that they couldn't communicate quickly and effectively with other units. So everything took time to do, while the Germans were able to instantly communicate amongst each other with the radio system, specifically in the tanks, because the tanks could communicate in between each other without the use of flags or signals. They could just get on a radio and speak to the next tank directly. So that is a huge help, communications is. So it's good to know that they have secure communication systems. We also see that they're getting the commercial satellite imagery. We've known about that for a while. EOD gear, explosive ordnance disposal. That's interesting. They must be giving them some sapper kits, probably to go through and clear out mines and such. And then medical supplies to include first aid kits. We don't, of course, have an exact number on that, and I do think it would be very nice to get an exact number on how many that includes. We have actually provided 1.7 billion in assistance to Ukraine, which at the moment does outpace the European Union by nearly 2 to 1. Now that they're adding the extra 500 million euros onto it, they're actually now matching us nearly. But as of the moment, we've actually provided more aid today than they have. Hopefully we can kind of get into competition with the EU, and the EU can get into competition with us to see who can provide the most aid to the Ukrainians in terms of military arms. So that way the Ukrainians will come out of this pretty well at the end of it. We're now going to move on to the last bit of news, and this is the biggest news in terms of support and supplies. the United States government has approved a Lend-Lease program to Ukraine. This was just approved today, and a Lend-Lease, much like it was in World War II, is where we're just going to send over a large amount of vehicles, and we're pretty much going to let the Ukrainians keep them until the war's over, and we may request the return of a decent amount of them once it's over. I believe we did that for a pretty decent deal of the Russian vehicles we actually gave over. I believe that we actually requested a large amount of them back, or requested payment for the vehicles that we sent over by the end of the war. So I think the Lend-Lease will do very good for Ukraine. That'll help them to easily bolster their numbers. Lend-Leases are, of course, one of the most powerful systems to provide supplies in. You know, as we could see, World War II was an incredibly effective example of what a Lend-Lease can actually do. It can change the fate of a war in some respects, especially for the Soviet Union. And so with that, we have reached the end of the news for tonight. I hope y'all all have enjoyed, and with that, we're now going to move on to the questions that we have gotten. So with that, how many super chats do we have, Matthew?
So let's see. We're currently sitting at about 27.
All right. So with that, on to the first question.
All right. And first up, we have a super chat from Tyler Hamilton, who puts in a donation of $20. He says, first super chat, Slava Ukraine.
Thank you very much. I'm glad that is your first super chat. Hopefully you'll enjoy this enough to become a return supporter. It does help us to continue to run this channel and think big. And so I thank you so much. I will definitely remember you, and I'm glad that it is your first super chat. That's very neat, and I'm glad that you enjoy the content enough to actually support us. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have Will Riley, who is our jokester of the night. He puts in a donation of $10. He says, the merch looks awesome. Dick Cheney tested. Dick Cheney approved.
Well, I thank you very much for the approval. Also, let's see. It's called enforcerstore.com, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Just for everyone to know, just in case you haven't gotten to the Enforcer store, I'm going to show it to y'all. The merch is pretty cool. Also, we do donate some of the proceeds of the merchandise to charity. And so here's the merch. We've got a pretty cool mug. We've got a stainless steel mug. We also have a t-shirt. I love the t-shirt, actually. It turned out a lot better than actually I thought it would. So I'm pretty happy with that. We got a phone case, and we also have stickers. We also made sure, because there's always this thing, you know, because I haven't bought channel merch before from anyone, because I've never actually liked the designs. I'm actually happy with mine. I think they look cooler than most. But the one thing about this shirt, and one thing I always hear from people who do buy channel merch, is that they're always disappointed in the quality of the shirts. Like, they're always like the cheapest quality. But the thing is that with my channel, I was like, you know, of course everything we're going to do is try and be as high quality as possible. So we made sure to pick the best quality material for the shirt that we could possibly choose from Teespring. So we tried to get the best stuff here, and we also tried to get the best logo designs. Of course, it's just the Enforcer right now, but we are working on Leafspring merch. It will hopefully be out by Tuesday. So hopefully, if y'all would like to support the channel and get something out of it, make sure to go check out the merchandise, because it's pretty neat. I actually got my own merchandise and samples. I got a t-shirt and a mug. And also that's for me to do quality control and make sure that I like what's actually coming out. And so hope y'all do enjoy it. And so without giving like a whole 5-minute infomercial and plug on that stuff, we're now going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from TJ Johnson, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, coffee fund.
And thank you very much for the coffee fund. We will, of course, drink as much coffee as possible. Matthew and me actually drink coffee about the same time now, like the same load. It's always a pike roast with a creme brulee creamer. It's good stuff. It's a coffee, and of course gets us through the stream. And so I'll make sure to put that towards getting more K-Cups. So I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Hoodoo, Texas, who puts in a donation of $10. They say, with the upcoming Eastern offensive, is Putin trying to recreate Stalin's victory of Operation Uranus? Another Stalingrad? He could claim to be new Stalin, and all of Russia will worship him.
Well, first off, I laughed. I know about that operation, okay, but I am still kind of kind of a high schooler in heart in a way, you know, and so I still kind of laugh at that because it is a joke that was talked about so much when I was in school. So, to answer that question, I think that may be what he's trying to look for, but I just don't think they can achieve it. They've shown that the Russian army is incompetent. I don't really think there's a way to get around that. There's not enough changes that they can make in such a short amount of time to improve their situation. You know, it took Abraham Lincoln 3 years in the Civil War to actually get generals that he was happy with. You know, it took him 3 years. It took most it takes most militaries a few years to sort out the problems that they're having. And so I just don't think, considering how this war is going, they're going to have the time to actually fix those problems and try and pull off a successful operation like that. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that answers the question in a way. And I think the Russians already mostly worship Putin. His approval ratings are incredibly high. Once again, you're not going to see anything go against Putin, considering it's pretty much a dictatorship in that country. But nonetheless, it appears also from interviews on the street, most people support him. So with that, I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Mr. Jim. He says, Enforcer, what is your rough estimate on how much it has cost the Russians in the war? I saw they have launched 100 missiles at 10 M. Also, I have been here since almost day one.
What was his name again?
Mr. Jim.
Mr. Jim. Okay, I think you were actually in the chat. I think I do remember answering your question specifically a long time ago. If you were in the chat, I may be wrong though, but I do think I remember a Mr. Jim. I wish. Now, this is someone I wish I could come in contact with again because I don't see him in the chat. The Biggest Arm in Westland, Oregon. I remember that name because it was the funniest name in the chat when I was just starting off the stream and I had no viewers, and it was just funny to me. I hope that they're still here, and if they are, hey, I still think about that account name still. But moving on from that, to answer the question, could you reread it because I got caught up in the Biggest Arm thing? But could you reread that question again for me real quick?
So he asks, what is your rough estimate on how much it cost the Russians in the war? He says they've launched a lot of missiles, and he wants to know basically what's it costing the Russians.
We haven't been able to attain an exact cost, but the last time I had someone check, it was at least over $25 billion, and that was weeks ago. And so at this point, it may be up to around $50 billion, which is getting very close to the annual budget that the Russians actually use for their military as a whole. So if that gives you an idea of the amount of losses they're taking, it's been an incredibly large amount. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer your question in a way. And I'm glad to know that I have viewers who have been here since the start and are still here on day 43 because it has been long. It's been a very long war, much longer than anyone thought. So I thank you very much for sticking with it. And I thank you very much once again for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to quickly say that if you have put in a question, don't worry about it. It is in the spreadsheet, and we're going to get to it very shortly. But next up, we have a question from Action Jax, who says, do you know of any Ukrainian POWs in Russian custody, or are the Russians not taking prisoners and just systematically executing people?
We do know that they are taking prisoners. That's one thing that we can be certain of. We don't know the actual number, though. We haven't been able to get an actual clear number that isn't heavily propagandized by the Russians or the Ukrainians. So unfortunately, I can't say how many, but we do know that they have some because they've been exchanging prisoners occasionally, not often, but occasionally. I actually did find out that that some of the Snake Island soldiers did survive on that island. Still have it marked as Russian controlled, by the way. That's been there for weeks. Well, actually a month and a half now. They did survive, and they actually managed to do a prisoner exchange for those prisoners in particular. So we do know that they are keeping Ukrainian prisoners. They're not just slaughtering them all. So I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have one from S. Moore, who says, Sylvia, the slippery sockeye salmon, says, when are the Russians going to run out of missiles? Why are there so many dudes, missiles, and rusty mortars?
Well, thank you very much for the question from the sockeye salmon. We do, of course, always like to hear from the sockeye salmon. To answer that question, the Russians aren't running out of missiles because usually they have a stockpile of several hundreds, if not a few thousand of these missiles. And so while they have a large inventory of them, all the missiles that they're using are irreplaceable. They simply do not have the parts due to sanctions to produce any more of those missiles. Mostly it's the computer systems inside of them. But beyond that, they just simply don't have the parts to cover the question as a whole. So with that in mind, you can get the idea that the Russians just have a large amount of them. They're still using them. It's just that I know that they're probably starting to use them a little bit more liberally, or they because the war is going bad, and even though it may hurt their long-term situation, I guess they'll start relying on the nukes as a threat more as time goes on. But that's why we see so many of them being used, although they no longer have the ability to produce any more of them. So I hope that does answer your question in a way, and thank you very much for the return support. You are always here with the Sockeye Salmon comments, and keep them coming, and I thank you very much for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have none other than Tito McLovin, who says, with Ukraine's food exports on hold, the much larger, fertile U.S. Midwest can stretch our lead, but can U.S. farmers fill the gap and feed Europe, Middle East, and Asia?
American farmers can fill the gap entirely. America produces enough food to feed our population 3 times over. The fact of the matter is that a lot of people are like, well, Andrew, if that's the case, well, yeah, that's my name. But anyways, Enforcer, if that is the case, another scrub. I know Matthew's probably busting out laughing right there. But Enforcer, if that's the case, then how come, like, food is so expensive in America? Well, here's the thing. The United States government heavily regulates food in the United States. That goes all the way from milk to cheese to beef and so on. The United States government pays farmers to destroy their crops or to not plant. The reason is because they want to make sure that the prices are high enough, not that they're trying to gouge the public and make them starve to death. The thing is that they have to make sure that the prices are high enough so the farmers don't go broke. Because if they go broke, then they're not growing crops. And if they're not growing crops, if they're not growing crops, then people starve and then people die. So it's kind of an assurance to make sure that the prices stay up high enough that farmers can actually make a living and, you know, the population doesn't starve in the meantime. So if we need to, the United States government will stop paying farmers to not plant or destroy the crops at the end of the season, and then they will start to export that food globally, because then the price will be able to maintain what it is right now, and they're not going to be suffering any kind of profit losses. In fact, they'll be getting more profits, and the farmers will be having a pretty good time. So I want everyone to remember with that, because there's been a decent amount of politically charged comments with that. I want y'all to know the United States government doesn't tell farmers to destroy crops and stuff, because it was brought up a bit like a while ago, and I don't want to get into it because it'll start delving into American politics, but it was brought up as the thing is like the government was trying to induce some kind of famine in America, but it was just brought up out of the blue, and it was actually just a bit of disinformation, because that is common. Like, they actually control, like, not to go down a rabbit hole, I'm sure y'all are fine with this, but to go down the rabbit hole a little bit, the United States controls where milk can be sold. So milk in your area, like, say you're in Georgia and you're drinking milk in Georgia, that milk did not come from California. That milk came from somewhere in that area. They actually control that kind of stuff. So just to clarify, the government does not pay people to destroy crops to try and induce famine. They do that to make sure that the prices of crops are managed at a rate where farmers won't be losing their shirts. So kind of want to make that clear, and to add on to that once more, they will stop paying farmers to destroy crops and such and let them sell them abroad, so that way they can continue to make money and also fix the food situation, because the United States produces an amount of food that's unbelievable. We are a breadbasket of this world. So I hope that answers the question. I hope that actually adds on a little bit more. And so I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from VJ Mari, who says, what if Ukraine sold Crimea, Donetsk, and Lugansk to Russia to solve the conflict?
I don't think they would sell it. Russia would just claim, why would we buy it? We already own it. But yeah, I think, I mean, like, if they're winning, maybe they could. You know, maybe if they start pushing them back into Donetsk and Luhansk and they're right back on the border of Crimea, they could be like, hey, you know, we're going to inevitably take this stuff, and if you don't want to lose it, you can pay for it. And maybe they would do that. I don't really know. Honestly, though, if they're going to make the Russians pay money to keep Crimea, at that point, I would probably just try and annex it again. Sevastopol is a major port, and if anything, retaking that, if it's possible, everyone knows my stance on what the Russians think about Crimea as a part of Russia. But if they didn't think that, and they were able to retake that Crimean Peninsula, that would be stripping the Russians of their second largest port, their second major port for the Russian Navy. The Russian Navy bases out of really like 3 ports in the western side of the country, which is the most important part. Sevastopol, St. Petersburg, and this one port up here called Arkhangelsk, and also Murmansk a little bit, but it's more of a minor port. They have a lot of ports, but there's like 3 large ones, and those 3 are the largest in terms of what they're basing there. So I hope that answers the question in a way, and I thank you very much for the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, I want to recognize a $20 donation from Darth Meat. Thank you very much for your donation. We very much appreciate it. Next up, we have a comment from Louise Salmaron, who says, "Thanks for your work to report what's going on in the war."
And I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you do enjoy our content and think that it's worthy of support. And once again, we will be trying to produce a video, and we will start trying to actually add videos into kind of like our upload schedule, depending on, how well they do. And we'll try and see about producing some interesting content that isn't entirely focused on the Ukrainian war, may have a focus on it, but it'll be interesting info nonetheless. So if y'all do enjoy my presentation style and format, we are going to try and carry that over into the videos in a way. And so I thank you very much for the support. Glad you enjoyed the content. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next question goes to Jake Strauss, who says, Pew Research shows Russia is viewed high as an enemy now amongst Democrats and Republicans.
Could you say that again?
He says that a Pew Research poll shows that Russia is viewed high as an enemy amongst Democrats and Republicans. I think he's basically saying that, regardless of your party, people think Russia is an enemy now.
Yes, I can agree with that. I think that is the large feeling around the country. But I have actually wandered around, and I've kind of asked people about it, and either people don't care at all, like like asking me, so what have you heard about Ukraine? Nothing, and I'm like, huh, well, you think someone would pay attention to a large war happening in continental Europe, but and then other people actually go, I don't know, it may be a grand conspiracy theory, and the Russians may actually be the good guys. And so I've actually heard some people say things that are either indifferent or maybe a little bit supportive of the Russians, which tells me that while the graphs are showing that, my real life experience has shown that group is actually out there in some way or another. I don't know about their political affiliations. I don't get into that on this channel, but I have seen it. I think it may be present on both sides in a small form, or maybe even larger than what the polls are stating. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question, kind of add in a little bit of my input and real life experience off of it. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from Ligma Sigma, who says, "Don't worry about it, but my girlfriend wants your number, though."
Hey, well, tell her no. I think the high compliment, but no. So I thank you very much for the support. Tell her to be loyal. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up is a comment from Mr. Jim again. He says, "Enforcer, do you have a video of the 83-year-old Ukrainian woman who told the Russians to F off? There is a new video of her saying what she said to the Russians after her city was actually liberated."
I have not actually seen that video. Maybe I can find it, or maybe someone will send that to me after the stream. Hopefully so I can take a look at it. But I thank you very much for letting me know about it, but I haven't actually heard of it. So thank you once again for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from Rich Hogan, who is now a longtime channel supporter. He says, "Thanks for the hard work as always, especially telling the story of the civilians because it needs to be told."
Well, I thank you very much for the support once again, and I'm glad that you do enjoy that. I try and show the civilian side of the story as well. The channel has started off as a frontline storytelling kind of thing, where we try and show events from the front lines and discuss what's happening there. But the civilian side of things is equally important. The home front is as important as the front itself. So I thank you very much for appreciating that and enjoying the content I am delivering. And so once again, thank you for the support. And that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have one from Kurt Sievert, who says, do you think the fascist Federation army will be degraded so much by the debacle in Ukraine that they will not be able to free any other countries from Jewish Nazis?
Yes, I do think that they may be looking at a little situation here in the future where the Russian army will be so embarrassed and the Russians will be in such an actual state that they're not really able to do much rather than a military intervention here and there inside of Kazakhstan and so on. Because that was the thing. Go check that out. The Russians actually sent in a couple of hundred, if not a few thousand troops into Kazakhstan when there was some revolts and riots there to pretty much uphold the government. I think they actually may have put in a new one. I'm not really exactly sure. But nonetheless, I think that that will be the case. And I do understand what you're trying to say. It's just that the wordage there was a little bit questionable. I heard Matthew kind of wavering on saying it, but yeah, I do know what you're saying. But thank you very much for the support once again. And so we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from another longtime channel supporter, OG Wakanobi. He says, I put in the Wolverines comment. Glad I got to save the screenshot. Red Dawn 1984.
That's right, and I'm glad that someone actually over there appreciates games and movies because in the middle of this war, they give everyone some gems. I mean, like some stuff that will be put down in history books probably is like, look, it's a pop culture reference used in war. So I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it came full circle now, and that story has come to a close. So I thank you once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And we have about 12 more super chats left. So if we haven't gotten to yours yet, it is coming up. Don't worry. Next up, we have a question from Duncan VR who says, I watched a replay of your last video and it was playing in Russian. He says, just joking, LOL. Slava pizza, get one for dinner.
Thank you very much. I do enjoy pizza. Let me know in the chat what y'all like. But honestly, I like Papa John's. I mean, y'all might be Domino's fans. Y'all might be Pizza Hut fans. And there's probably a really small amount of y'all who are Little Caesar fans. But let me know because pizza is kind of like a dividing thing here in America, like depending on which one you like. It's almost like liking a football team. So I thank you very much for the support. I will get myself a pizza. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And you said you like who now? Papa John's?
Papa John's.
Oh, Papa.
What are you talking about?
Well,
Papa
anyways,
John's.
moving on to the next one. We have a comment from Gene Kraus who puts in a donation of $10. He says, love your updates. Are you still an undergrad or a graduate history student? Either way, it's awesome.
I think the proper term, I don't really get into the terminology of anything, it's like to me, I'm going through school, a war's going on, things like that, I just don't like advanced terms. There was a time in my life where I got really dug into them and then I figured out that they really don't matter. So I don't really know what I am. I think I'm actually an undergraduate. Am I, Matthew?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'm an undergraduate. So to answer that question, I'm an undergraduate, but I really don't focus on that. I just focusing on pumping out great grades and just getting through. So I thank you very much for the support. And there's the answer to your question. Matthew helped me out with that one. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And I want to recognize two donations real quick. We have an $8 donation from Dimitri Frunza. Thank you very much. And a $6 donation from Ben Tommen. Thank you very much to both of you. We do appreciate it very, very much. Moving on to the next question, we have from Willness, who says, how to remove Putler. Glad we're in NATO, otherwise the Baltics would be completely occupied already.
Yeah, the Baltics would have been swarmed. And sadly, I don't think the Baltics could have put up the kind of defense that Ukraine's putting up. I'm not going to sit there and say they're not brave people. I mean, like when push comes to shove, everyone becomes brave. But the thing is that the Baltic states are just so under-equipped. I mean, like it's due to how small they are. I mean, like, it's not a problem with them being poor or anything. It's a problem with their budgeting and their national economy. They just can't field large armies. They're like Denmark in World War II. So unfortunately, they get overrun, yes. So I'm very glad that they are member states of NATO, and the United States was able to take advantage of Russia's kind of like weaknesses coming out of the Soviet Union in the early 90s and early 2000s to start bolstering the numbers in NATO and adding the Baltics and Poland and most of the Balkan and Central European countries as well. So I thank you very much for the support, and I am glad that they are a member of NATO. I don't really know about a coup to remove Putin, or as people are calling him these days, Putler. I don't really know if that will ever succeed, because it looks like right now he may actually remain in power even with this massive flop on his record. So I thank you very much for the support. We will wait and see if that story does develop and if anything happens. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question is from JuneBug72, who says, "Thank you for being here. I am praying hard, but congrats on your merch launch and Slava Ukraine."
Slava Ukraina, and thank you very much for congratulating us on the launch of the merch. I said originally with the merch that we were going to have leaf springs at the start, but we actually started to look at it and we didn't like our actual design that we came up with, and so I was like, scratch it. I'm not going to push out something that's garbage. We're going to make sure that it looks good, and so we're actually looking at a really cool design. It's going to look like a blueprint, like the shirt's going to be blue, but I'm not going to get into it beyond that. So I thank y'all very much for the support. We are working on that right now, and it will probably be out on Tuesday, which will be the day after the week break that's taken on Monday. So hopefully y'all will enjoy the Lee Spring merch and really like it, because I think it's going to look really cool, kind of like the shirts we got right now and stuff. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Echo Sierra, who says, "I've been listening since day 3. Good work. And now it's time to check out the merch."
Well, thank you very much for the support. I'm glad that you do enjoy the streams, and I hope you do enjoy the merch. It doesn't really matter to me what you get. I think it all looks great, and I also like to give credit to Matthew, who did design the shirts mostly, and I just gave input on what I liked and what I didn't like. But big thanks to Matthew, huge props, because he actually designed the phone case and the sticker entirely on his own, and I thought those looked pretty cool. I mean, like they're bangers in my opinion. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you do enjoy the merch. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Michelle Russell, who says, "Thanks for all you do. Please explain the leaf spring thing for those of us who found your stream late. Keep up the great work."
All right, so here's the story of the Leaf Spring. We were watching a video on stream of a Russian anti-air vehicle, I believe it was called a Pantsir, that was destroyed. The guy showed the wheels on the vehicle, and you could see a leaf spring. And I said, wow, oh my gosh, that's like ancient. Like, I don't even think anyone uses leaf springs anymore. And so I pulled it up to see if I was right about that, and I figured out immediately that I was wrong. But the chat didn't let me live it down, because it was just such a funny and goofy mess up. So that's kind of the reason why leaf springs is a thing, and it's just kind of stuck. Honestly, I like the joke. I think it was kind of a funny mess up, and I also like that people keep on trying to take the piss with the thing. You know, it's just funny. So it's a joke that kind of lives on. Some people have gotten tired of it because it's been spammed a pretty good deal, but nonetheless, it still has a little bit of a charm and a quality to it that I do appreciate, and a lot of people do enjoy it. And so I'm going to try and add some merch out there so that way everyone can get that leaf spring fix, like satiated in a way. So I hope that does answer the question of the origin of the leaf spring. And so I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you do now become a member of the Leaf Spring Army, which is what the viewers are called. So I thank you very much once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night goes to Maximad, who says, "The Google map and description is from yesterday's stream. It's not day 43 map. I just wanted to let you know."
Yeah, I did see that. I actually briefly turned on the live chat on my phone for a second and saw that super chat, and so I did address that one a while ago. Unfortunately, I can't fix that midstream because I have to throw up a card, and a lot of people are like, "Oh," and they leave. And I don't want people to like get pissed off and leave. You know, I want them to stay around for the questions, get their questions answered, and don't think out of the blue that I just bailed on them. So I will fix that after the stream. I'll just go through and edit it real quick. But I thank you very much for the support and bringing that to my attention. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a $25 donation from Daniel Viana, who says, "What about sending M1 Garand and carbines to civilians to protect themselves? The U.S. produced 6 million of them, and Korea has 1 million in a stockpile."
Okay, I got to tell you this. I love that you kind of touched on that a little bit. M1 Garands are kind of dated. They're not too dated, but they kind of are. They're very heavy. I've actually owned a few, and they weigh about 9 pounds. And while that's not a lot, you know, you got to consider, if you carry that thing around all day, that thing will get heavy. I can tell you that for sure. But rather than that, I'm actually a huge fan of the Garand. I of course have owned a few. I've shot them a decent bit, and I gotta say they're fairly accurate and very competent rifles. I've never had a jamming issue with one, which I've had with other rifles, and so I've been fairly happy with it. I like it honestly, and I think that would be a genius idea. There is a group here in the United States that has access to all the M1 Garants that the US still has in storage, and they sell them for like, I'm not going to get into that though. But anyways, thank you very much for the support, and I think that is a really good idea. And so, I think that should happen. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from a longtime channel supporter, Adam Lee Fox. He says, Wolverines is from the movie Red Dawn. I look forward to buying some merch after the stream. Hope you got that grande coffee tonight, and Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraina, and right now I am juiced up on coffee. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope you do enjoy that merch. Of course, I like the shirt. We're gonna come out with a new one with a leaf spring on it as well, so maybe it will get the whole collection. We're gonna run the jokes though as limited edition things because I don't want to run the jokes into the ground, you see, and they are kind of, and jokes are like a shelf life kind of thing. They only last so long, and then the joke does die. And so I don't want the leaf springs to be a permanent thing. I want it to be something we all laugh about during like the time of the streams. But when everything moves on, everyone will of course still be called the Leaf Spring Army. But things will change, more jokes will pop up, and I want to make sure not to run them into the ground in the meantime. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope you do enjoy the merch. It is nice looking stuff. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a comment from TJ Johnson, who is, I believe, a longtime channel supporter as well. He puts in a donation of $20 and says, I think the Ukraine should open a northern and southern front without being drawn into the middle of the Russia occupied territory and finding themselves encircled by Russian forces.
I think that is a fairly decent idea. One thing, though, is that if they open up a southern front and an eastern front in a way, if that is what he said, I was just making sure because I noticed something in the chat and I was like, no, don't say that. But he did say eastern front, didn't he?
He said a northern and southern front.
Northern and southern. So I'm assuming that you're saying them shoot out and break through towards Belgrade and Kursk. I think that would start threatening Russian sovereignty directly, so I'm really cautious about that one, although it could be something they may be able to do. I think that would start causing a lot of issues. But launching a southern front, I could see that, from like Zaporizhia and Kherson. Yeah, I mean, like that's something that I think would actually work very well. Also, I have to address something in the comments real quick. Don't say it. One of y'all said it. Y'all are talking about where you can get the M1 Garants. Don't do it. Don't do it, okay? Because you see it's going to drive the prices up. And if oh man, okay, that's all I got to say. But please stop, for the love of God. You're gonna hurt us all. You're gonna hurt us all who knows about that sweet little secret. But anyways, I hope I answered that question for you, and I thank you so much for the support. But with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And real quick, before I move on to the next one, I just want to give a quick shout out to Patrick McHugh. Don't worry, Patrick, your question is in the spreadsheet. It's just down a little bit further, but we're going to get to it. I think it's like 3 questions away, but don't worry, stick around. We are going to get to it. Next up, we have a question from Hoodoo, Texas, who puts in a donation of $10 and says, do you think that APCs with turrets are being misused in warfare as light tanks? Even in Iraq, the U.S. seemed to overexpose them.
I think that's really the role that APCs have kind of filled in prior years, is that they are filling the role of the light tank. As you know, the United States got rid of all of their light tanks. The last ones they had were the M551 Sheridans. They got rid of those, and they never got a replacement. The Russians, I believe, also got rid of all of their light tanks some while ago, actually. I believe it was just right after the Second World War. And APCs are all that's left. So APCs are kind of filling that gap of light tank armor that no country really possesses anymore. And so I do think they are being used like light tanks. I would have to agree, but I think that's just because there is no other kind of armor to fill that role. You either bring in a main battle tank or you bring in an APC or an infantry fighting vehicle, although the Russians don't have any infantry fighting vehicles. So I hope that answers the question. I do see that as well. I just think that although it does have limitations and it isn't really a light tank, they just have to use them that way because they really have nothing else. So I thank you very much for the support. I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a question from Patrick McHugh, who says, what is the combined size/power of NATO allies' maritime force, and how does it compare to Russia's? Is a blockade of Russia even plausible?
And he's talking about the Ukrainian Navy?
Let's see. He says I'll just read it again. He says, what is the combined size/power of NATO allies' maritime force? How does it compare to Russia's? And is a blockade of Russia even plausible?
Okay, so to answer that question, the the Western countries outnumber Russia in as far as the naval size by a huge margin. Let me do this. NATO naval size versus Russia. Let's see if we can just get infographic on that. NATO navy size versus Russia. Maybe there's an infographic here that we can take a look at. NATO versus Russia. Armored. That's just going over the ground forces. It appears. That's kind of sad. What about naval forces? You know what? We'll just pull up. How many ships are in the U.S. Navy? Because there's a lot of other countries. A lot of other countries have large navies, but it's really just the United States and the Russian Federation that, at least on paper, go toe to toe, and the Russians don't really go toe to toe. Russian Federation Navy size. Let's see. They have how many ships? How many ships? Let me just type that in. How many ships are in the Russian Federation? And then if we want to add in the Royal Navy, the French Navy, and so on, they have 350 active ships in the Russian Navy. The United States has 480 ships. So they outnumber them a pretty good bit. Actually, the numbers are really small when you think about it, because in World War II, we had thousands of ships. Also, if we want to add in the British Royal Navy size, they have 74 commissioned ships, 85, including, I don't know if that's including the aircraft, the Fleet Air Arm, as it's called in Britain. And then we can pull up the French Navy size. We can see that they have 180 ships. So actually, wow, the French Navy is actually rather large, even compared to the British Navy. Wait, Royal Fleet Reserve. Can we just get a number on that? That's a little bit of confusing actual wordage there. Any actual number? How many? Oh, let's just type it in. How many ships are in the Royal Navy? 70. According to Statista, 70. So the French actually have a much larger navy than the British. That's not really historically accurate, but it appears to be the case now. So let's add all this together real quick. We're just going to calculate it together. We're not going to talk about capital ships and stuff, because then we'll be splitting hairs and be here for hours. 180 plus some 70 from the British plus some 480 from the United States. Because those are really the largest powers in NATO. You can see that they have 730 ships combined compared to Russia's 350. So basically, they outnumber them 2-1 in terms of naval power. So to give you an answer, it's a large deal. And then, if you want to get into capital ships, the United States has how many? I don't really know how many active aircraft carriers they have anymore, because they've decommissioned a large deal, and they've commissioned very few after the decommissioning of the Enterprise class. No, I'm sorry, the Richard Nixon. Oh, no. Oh my God, I forgot the name. Are you kidding me? I can't believe I forgot the name. It's named after the Nimitz class. That's the name. The Nimitz class aircraft carriers. That we've decommissioned a large amount of those, and we haven't really replaced them a lot with the Gerald R. Ford class. So we're still waiting for that. And at the moment, I think we may have 8 aircraft carriers. The Russians only have 1. So in terms of naval air power, we're going to be able to stomp them wherever they go, just the United States alone. The British have 2 aircraft carriers, I believe, the HMS Queen Elizabeth II, and I believe the HMS Prince of Wales. The French, I don't know what kind of aircraft carrier the French have, but they only have 1. So I hope that answers the question in a way, at least the statistics of it. And so we're now going to move on to the next question.
And the next question of the night goes to Bob A., who puts in a donation of $10. He says, Enforcer, following up on Ukraine natural gas reserves along Black Sea region, check out Harvard International Review article titled The Forgotten Potential of Ukraine's Energy Reserves.
I'll make sure to check that out. I'm not really sure Considering that we're now trying to fit a video into things, if I will have the time to do that soon, but I will try and read that if possible. So I thank you very much for the suggestion, and I am glad that you keep on bringing it up because resources are an important factor in what wars are fought for. In fact, the Russians may be trying to go for those gas reserves as of now and change their strategy to at least get something out of the war. So I thank you very much, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another comment from Darth Meat. He says, I saw that Shell Oil found a huge oil reserve in the Donbass around 2009 and 2010. Can you confirm in the future if this is truly just a war to grab the oil fields and motivated by greed?
I will certainly try. If we can get any information after the war is over, and I'll try and maybe do some follow up videos or follow up streams on it to show the damage, the reconstruction, and the reasons for the war as we see as time goes on. I will see if that was one of the leading factors for the Russians to try and invade Ukraine, is to try and maintain some kind of monopoly on oil production in Eastern Europe. So I hope that answers your question in a way, and we will be diligent and try and look out for it the best we can. And so, with that, I thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And we have one more comment from Bob A., who says, and today's DW News piece entitled Russian War Crimes, the End of Germany's Illusions, both are most interesting and give solid reasons for Ukraine retaining the eastern areas of the country.
Well, I thank you very much for the support once again, and I'm glad that you did add that. I do believe that simply Ukraine should control the eastern portions of the country simply because they're within their national borders and they have a inherent right to the land that they actually originally claimed and inherited during the collapse of the Soviet Union, and also the partitioning of the land during the Russian Civil War, the opening parts of it. So I thank you very much for the support, and I do agree with that entirely, and I will try and take a look at it. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one goes to Havoc, who says, what is the general opinion of the American public towards the war in Ukraine? Here in Eastern Europe, we only hear what the press tells us.
The opinion here in the United States is largely in support of Ukraine, but there is a small group of people. I've seen some that I would assume are on both sides of the political field here in the United States that actually support the Russians, either because I'm not really going to get into that because, well, no, because I'm going to be kind of talking about both parties equally. Either there's some kind of like communist in a way who's wanting to revision the glory of the former Soviet Union or something because they think it was a utopia, or they're on the other side and they're thinking that the Russians are going to pull up dirt on the other political side of the spectrum and expose them for what they are. And both sides, I don't really see where they're coming from. I mean, like, they're the explanations that they give, I just don't really think they make any sense at all. And on top of that, they're pro-Russian, so I'm like, that doesn't really jive with me. And while I try and keep neutral, I am pro-Ukrainian. So at the end of the day, that's one thing I will pick a side on. So I thank you very much for the support, and that's kind of the breakdown of what's going on in the U.S. and who's saying what and why in a way without really delving into American politics too much. And so I thank you for the support, and I hope that does answer your question. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next one. But before we do, how many super chats do we have left?
So we currently have about 10 super chats left, and I think we will have to put the cut off on it tonight because we do need to get to our other chat questions as well. So I'm ready to go whenever you are, Enforcer.
All right, and on to the next question.
And the next one is from longtime channel supporter That Frost Wolf, who says, if the truth gets out and Putin finally realizes Russia took a fat loss with nothing won, possibly, will news of such loss break Putin? What are your thoughts?
I don't think it will. While the guy's never lost anything and he poisons people to ensure that he can stay in charge of the country, I think he'll just take this and live with it. He won't live much longer from what we know. Apparently, he has some kind of cancer that may be eating away at him. So he won't live much longer. I think he'll just take it and keep on going and then pull a Stalin and die of a stroke or something. Although he'll probably just die of cancer. So I hope that answers the question in a way. I think he'll actually maintain power in Russia after the war is over. It's looking like that right now. It's looking like a coup is less and less likely as time goes by. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that, we're on to the next one.
And up next is a donation of $5 from Augustin Lara. Thank you very much. We appreciate your donation. And next up, we have a question from Hoodoo, Texas, who says, Enforcer, are you the fellow that did the Tesla videos and the other car videos. Your voice sounds just like him.
Well, I thank you very much for the compliment. But the answer is no. This is actually my first endeavor, my first foray, as they like to call it, if that was pronounced correctly. I'm sure I made a lot of people chuckle there. But this is actually my first endeavor into YouTube and voice acting in general, if you want to call it voice acting. So, no, I wasn't actually in those videos. This is my first little trip into YouTube. So I hope that answers the question in a way, and I thank you very much for the support. And I've heard a lot of people say that my voice sounds incredibly good, and I've just grown up with this voice, and so I don't see anything special about it. But apparently, a lot of people do find it pretty neat. So I thank you all so much for finding it neat. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from VMan29397 who says, am I the only one who has Pink Floyd's new song about Ukraine stuck in their head? Also, what are your thoughts on us bringing back the land lease program?
I think the bringing back the Lend-Lease program is incredibly good, considering that Ukraine needs to aid and we're not trying to get involved in the war. The Lend-Lease was kind of a way, because I believe we did the Lend-Lease much earlier with Britain than we did with Russia. It's a kind of a way for us to support the people we side with while not getting directly involved. And so I'm very happy with it. I think it's a good step in the right direction once again in terms of supply and actually supporting them. And so I like it, and I support it 100%. And so I hope that does answer the question in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have another comment from Augustin Lara, who says, the Russian army reminds me of the French army during the beginning of World War I with their outdated uniforms.
And he's talking about the Russians?
Yes.
Okay. One thing I like to say is that the French went into World War I with some drip, as people say these days. I have to admire that. They may have died in those outdated uniforms, but those things looked pretty decent. I mean, like, I'm just gonna say, French army, French uniform, actually. Uniform, 1914. They changed it in 1915 to Horizon Blue. But anyways, this was the uniform they went into war with in 1914. Now, you cannot tell me that that was like a fashion designer who made that up in the late 1800s. It was a pretty decent uniform in terms of style. Not so much for fighting. That's why they changed it here in this little clip art thing to Horizon Blue, as you can see right here, which blended in much better with the ground and was a much more solid option. Also, they adopted the puttees that the British used, and also the Americans used them as well, but that's getting into like a deep dive into that stuff. But nonetheless, while the French looked good going into World War I, the Russians don't look good going into this war. Their uniforms look terrible, especially the DPR and LPR troops. Everything they wear is mismatched, it's old, and it's ugly, and I don't like any of it, even in style, and especially in use, because it's just so dated, it might as well be obsolete. So I thank you very much for the support, and I'm glad you said that because it allowed me to talk about French uniform design and fashion in the early 1900s, which is one of my like periods I focus on a lot. So thank you very much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And next up, we have a comment from Cam Papiez, who says in all caps, please pronounce Slava Ukraine properly.
All right, we're gonna settle that. Glory to Ukraine in Ukrainian. Slava Ukraini. And let's see how to pronounce Glory to Ukraine in Ukrainian. Let's look at this video.
We are looking at how to say glory to Ukraine, how to pronounce this phrase, what you can say to greet a Ukrainian when you meet them, to support the country. Slava Ukraini.
I say it that way. What are you talking about? I say that right. Anyways, thank you for the support. We're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have one from Diffuse56, a longtime channel supporter, who says, as always, thanks to all of the Enforcers team for your hard work, integrity, and insightful analysis. Slava Ukraine.
Slava Ukraini. And yeah, I'm going to keep saying it that way, and you can live with it. But I thank you very much for the support. I do agree that my enforcers behind the scenes, Matthew's one of them, work tirelessly to help me with these streams. He does a lot of the question stuff. He also did a decent amount of designing with merch, and so I'm very appreciative for everything everyone does behind the scenes here to help me ensure that the channel keeps running. And I most importantly thank y'all, because without y'all's support, the channel could not survive. So I thank y'all once again, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And I just want to say for the people in the comments, yes, I do mispronounce it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it properly. There's no way I could. I can tell you that right now. But nonetheless, we're moving on to the next question. So the next one is from Kleck, who says, "Do you think Taiwan will get the same level of attention and aid when China inevitably invades Taiwan? And will enforcer report Taiwan straight war as well? We love your work."
If Taiwan does get invaded, I don't think it will, but if it does, yes, I will cover that, because that's going to be huge news and it'll be something important. So yes, it will get daily stream coverage, much like Ukraine gets. Probably by the time Ukraine sizzles down and the war ends, that may begin, if it does. Because I'm feeling like the Chinese aren't going to try and do that at the same time. So I thank you very much for the support, and I hope that does answer the question. Yes, I will cover that, and the streams will continue, and hopefully I can do videos in the background as well. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Steve Sturko, who says, "Mariupol still holding, which is what impresses me. Why do you think that's the case for almost 45 days now?"
Mariupol is holding really just because of the sheer will. I mean, like, there's no other explanation for it. It's just got to be the sheer will of the defenders in that city. They should have been wiped out by now, honestly. Everyone in the world watches on with awe as this small pocket of defenders holds this city day in and day out. This isn't the Middle Ages anymore, where a defending force can sit behind some castle walls and they're largely not affected by incoming fire in any way, or they have to wait for siege engines to be built. They're fighting in an open city, and somehow they're holding it for this long. The Battle of Baghdad and the invasion of Iraq took 3 days. Well, really more like 4 days. But nonetheless, it was over and done with incredibly quickly. And here in Mariupol, we've been seeing it hold for nearly 40 days. And it's still here, and I don't know why. There's really no explanation to it. I think the only thing we could say at this point is that it's the sheer will and determination of the defenders that keeps this city alive. So I hope that answers the question. Unfortunately, it's not really a scientifically or factually based answer, but I hope it does answer it in a way. And so I thank you so much for the support, and we're going to move on to the next question.
And we have 3 more super chats left, and then we're going to get to our regular chats, which I'm sure many people have been waiting for. So next up, we have a question from CA Lags, who says, "Ukraine can keep cutting off the water to Crimea. It'll just be a matter of time before Crimea becomes untenable for Russia."
I think so, especially since you're weighing in the water situation. Maybe so. Considering that the water was cut off to Crimea, it kind of makes the land unarable, non-arable, if you want to say that. It pretty much makes it where they can't grow any crops there. So I do have to agree. I think the situation may become unattainable in the future if they continue to hold it after the war. And they may just try and give it up, or it may be a constant thorn in Russia's side, a blessing to them that then became a terrible curse, where they have to constantly try and give aid and maintain the dying corpse that the Crimean Peninsula will become. So I thank you very much for the support, and I can agree with that statement, and I hope I've weighed in a pretty good way on it. So I thank you very much once again, and with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And just to let everybody know, we did have a visit from the friendly webcam bot tonight. That thing's become a legend on this channel, I think, but they were deleted. So moving on to the next question, we have from Orlando Vera Muniv, who says, "Mexico has a historical doctrine of non-intervention. Look up Estrada Doctrine."
All right. Well, I thank you very much for the info there. I did hear today that there was apparently a new shift in government down there that may have led to them abstaining from the vote. But the thing is that while you may say that Mexico doesn't get involved in international affairs and it tries to keep a neutral stance, if Switzerland is picking a side, it's about time for everyone to pick a side, whether it be with us or against us, because the Swiss literally have never weighed in on anything. World War II was happening, and the Holocaust was literally happening right across their border. And they said, I mean, we can't get involved. Well, in fact, open up a bank account for them. And when they actually weigh in now, that's telling you that things have gotten pretty dire and people need to start picking sides. So I'm not really sure how to take it, but I do thank you very much for the information nonetheless and the support. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the next one is from Midget Hobbit, who says, well, you know who weren't brave? The Afghanis.
I would have to, I really honestly, not to give any credit to America's enemies in a way, but they were kind of brave in a way because, you know, during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and also the whole entire 20 years we were over there, the Mujahideen and then the Taliban later on continued to fight against us for years. I mean, like, and near the end, though, for the last few years of us being there, they didn't really do anything because we kind of made an agreement with them. But still, nonetheless, you know, the Afghan governments that were always trying to be propped up by the outside forces like the Soviet Union and the United States were weak. The actual will of like the Afghans is actually pretty strong. And I mean, like, while I don't really like their government or their ways or anything like that they currently have with the sitting government that's the Emirate of Afghanistan, I do have to give them credit that they did manage to fight off two of the largest powers in the world and pretty much make them leave. We didn't really lose. We just kind of, you know, finally withdrew. But, you know, they actually defeated the Soviets, and they just kind of made us leave because they became too much of a problem for us to really take care of. So, you know, I got to give them a little bit of credit for it. But nonetheless, I do thank you for the comment. And in a way, yeah, I could say the Afghan government, because it collapsed so quickly. It literally collapsed within days of us withdrawing, in the middle of us withdrawing still. And so I will have to agree that they weren't brave. But with that being said, I thank you very much for the support. And with that, we're going to move on to the questions from the chat if we don't have any more super chats.
And we actually have 3 more super chats that came in after the cutoff. Would you like me just to recognize the donations or read off the comments?
I'll read off the comments. We'll read them all.
Okay, so first up, we have a $20 donation from Tim Q, who says, it's a woman. Mayor Olga Sukenko and her family were shot and thrown into a pit in a forest behind a plot of land with several houses that the Russian forces then took over in the town of Matazin.
Okay, so I think that's revisiting the mayor that was killed up here. And thank you very much for clarifying the story. I didn't have the exact details. I just knew that she stayed behind and then was killed. So I thank you very much for clarifying the story of that patriot and hero, so that way everyone here in the chat and the stream can know the actual details. So I thank you very much once again. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, we have a question from Richard Simpkins, who says, did you notice Hungary voted to expel Russia from the Human Rights Council, even though Orban won his election this week? It was a surprise to me.
I don't actually follow Hungarian politics enough to know about the political parties and functions that are currently going on inside of Hungary for that to be a bit of an upset and a surprise. So unfortunately, I can't really weigh in on that one, but I do thank you for the support. And I am actually glad that you pay attention to Hungarian politics. I mostly focus on British politics, along with German politics, and a little bit of Polish politics. But beyond that, I don't really get into a lot of international countries' politics, and I just look at what their country is doing at the moment. And that's kind of like a general reflection on my part, you know, due to simplification of the process of seeing where they stand. So I thank you very much for sharing that info with us. I did not know that, actually. And with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And next up, to wrap up the final super chats that we have 2 super chats from none other than Knuckles. So the first one from Knuckles says, I am mentioning UN kicking out Russia last night. What will this bring now that it happened? Also, that video you said was white phosphorus is actually thermite incendiary.
Well, thank you very much for the support, and thank you very much for the comment. As far as I know, from what I've been able to tell, that is white phosphorus, although I may be wrong. White phosphorus air burst, and let's see if we can get a picture of it exploding in air. So on pictures, it looks a decent bit like white phosphorus, but let's pull up thermite. Let's see what that looks like when it explodes in an airburst. Thermite. So there's not a lot of pictures of it exploding in here. So I don't think that it is thermite. I'm going to kind of stick with my guns and say it's white phosphorus. It looks like a lot like the pictures that we see. Also, like right here in the Middle East in the Gaza Strip, we can see phosphorus being used. It looks identical. So it kind of lays out a precedent that that is probably white phosphorus. To answer the first part of the question, I don't really think it means much. Once again, the UN is kind of like a symbolic organization. While it does have some power, mostly it's like a get-together and feel-good organization, or they would have done something about Ukraine now, because they've already voted and said Russia's war is illegal, and then look, it wasn't really supported with anything, which kind of shows that they really have no power to carry through on what they do. So I don't really think it'll mean much. So I hope that answers your question in a way. And so with that, we're going to move on to the next question.
And the final super chat of the night is once again, as I said, from Knuckles, who says, also, NATO said today they will give more advanced heavy weapons that are not from the Soviet era. What does that entail? And sorry for falling asleep again. Grandma died unexpectedly a month ago, and trying to move Grandpa with me to take care of him.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and I hope that you and your granddad are okay and everything's going fine with y'all. But to answer the question about what NATO is going to be giving and what that'll entail, that's probably going to entail much of the same equipment that they've already been giving, and maybe some new things. For example, they'll probably be sending more Panzerfaust 4s, more Javelins, more in-laws, and such things like that. But at the same time, they may start adding in things like tanks or anti-ship missiles, or something like that. I'm not really sure exactly what it's going to entail because they haven't gotten out the details yet, but I do know that it may include more expensive price tag items that may be revolving more around the armored vehicle area, as far as we know right now. But we'll have to wait and see if that is the case. So I hope that answers the question, Knuckles, and I thank you once again for the support, and I hope that you and your granddad are all right. And so with that, we're now going to move on to 3 questions from the live chat, and then the stream will end. And so what do we got, Matthew?
Okay, so first up, we have a question from Speak the Truth, who says, Enforcer, did you hear about a possible nitric acid tank hit by missiles in the east?
Yes, we did. It was actually covered in the news a few days ago in Rubizhny. You can go to, well, actually, I think you can still click on the map tonight, and it shows last week's map, which is weird. But you can actually check it out there, and it shows the nitric acid attack, well, the nitric acid silo explosion in Rubizhny. And I think 2 different perspectives, one from the LPR and one from the Ukrainians. So yes, it did happen, and we did have info on it. So I hope that answers your question, and we're going to move on to the next one.
And the next one is from Zyper Sniper 1, who says, Enforcer, if World War III breaks out, would the West secure that Russia will never again be a superpower?
Yes, they would. If somehow we won without some kind of nuclear exchange, I think we would probably try and disarm Russia as far as the nuclear weapons. In fact, that if we won against Russia in a conventional war and there was no kind of nuclear onslaught that followed, maybe that would be the step in the world to mostly disarm the nuclear weapons. You know, we would disarm Russia. China has a pretty decent amount, but nowhere close as much as Russia. And maybe then we'd start trying to disarm the Chinese of nuclear weapons as well as ourselves through treaties. And then maybe we could see the denuclearization of the world. I don't really know, though. That's really ambitious, and that's really drawing a lot of assumptions off of thin air. So that's kind of my opinion on it. But I do think that we would try and ensure that Russia would never become a superpower again. Economic power, yes. Military superpower, no. So I thank you very much for the support. Oh, I'm sorry. I thank you very much for the question. And I thank you very much for asking it as well. It's a pretty interesting one, actually. No one's asked that before. And so with that, we're going to move on to the last question of the night. And so who is the lucky person who got in the last question, Matthew?
So the lucky person of the night is Montern, who I believe already got all for the night, unfortunately, but nonetheless, this is the next question up. So they said, fun fact, tanks are actually the code word used for the project to develop them. They were actually called land ships, but the name tank stuck.
Yes, I do know that story. Actually, since it's a World War One thing, I do know that Winston Churchill was kind of the guy who was heading the land ship committee, and they had all these grand ideas of what the land ships would be. And then they ended up being that thing, you know, that they developed out of Little Willie, and it became the Mark One, and then the Mark IV, and then from that, the rest is history. I believe the first one, I think the Mark One, the first Mark One that was made, that was shown off in that field was called Mother, because it's the first tank that all the other tanks kind of like came out of. So I thank you very much for saying that. I do enjoy that you do know the story of the Landship Committee and why they were called tanks. So I thank you very much for that. And with that, we've actually reached the end of tonight's stream. So everyone who's still watching, I do hope that you enjoyed tonight's stream. Make sure to go check out the merchandise store. It's brand new, it's open, and we got some pretty neat stuff in there. So if you like to support the channel and get something out of it, that's a very good way to do so. With that being said, I hope y'all have all enjoyed tonight's stream. We will be on tomorrow at the same time, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, and so I hope y'all have a great night. Good night, and take care.